Welcome to this special compilation video from Vietnamese case files. Today, we will revisit 9 shocking case files, where the dark shadows of crime hid behind the most glamorous and powerful facades. From the bloody shootings at San Jose coffee shops that exposed an underground gambling network and corruption within the police, to a cross-border money laundering scheme worth 67 million USD involving top media executives. We will witness the downfall of once iconic figures. A state legislator who seized firearms from a widow and the youngest mayor in history entangled in social vices. We will also cover unprecedented cases. A super hacker who stole 1 billion emails. A doctor who profited 150 million USD from COVID, won 9 relief funds and poured it into the stock market, and the delusional adventure of a young man who broke into the White House. Finally, we will recreate a breathless military operation to capture a head of state on charges of narco-terrorism. Stay with us until the end of the video to uncover the truth behind these sophisticated crimes. And if you enjoy investigative true crime content and want to follow along with Vietnamese case files and upcoming cases, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss a single episode. Now, let's begin. At 3 a.m. on March 11, 2016, the quiet of a Vietnamese coffee shop in East San Jose was torn apart by a burst of deafening gunshots. Minutes later, police received an emergency call from a passerby who said that right after the shots rang out, they saw a man collapsed in a pool of blood beside the shop's partially closed door. The scene of the tragedy was Bon More Cafe on Thule Road. Authorities rushed to the location, patrol sirens slicing through the night. Outside, dim neon lights cast an eerie glow over the chaos. One victim, critically wounded by gunfire, lay on the sidewalk. The cafe's glass door was cracked. Inside, chairs and tables were toppled, suggesting a fight had just erupted. The remaining customers and staff were left shaken by how quickly it all happened. At first, the crime scene looked like a sudden, random purge carried out by violent criminals. But police quickly reconsidered after a rapid sweep of Bon More Cafe. This coffee shop was not as harmless as it appeared. Behind a curtain were electronic gambling machines flashing with lights, along with a hidden cashier's counter containing suspicious stacks of cash. On the floor, beyond the shell casings, investigators also found several colorful stimulant packaging wrappers scattered around signs that contraband had been traded here. Every early clue pointed to the same conclusion. This wasn't just the site of a single attack, but one link in a larger, organized chain of illegal activity. While police collected evidence, outside the cafe, a few customers huddled together, exchanging anxious glances, then quietly slipped away, no one volunteering to stay and give a statement. That strange silence only deepened investigators' suspicions. Was there an invisible criminal hand making everyone too afraid to speak? This suspicion wasn't unfounded. A quick look at the scene showed the attacker's method was professional and ice cold. They fired fast and clean, then withdrew, leaving behind little more than a few spent shell casings. It was the kind of signature that immediately brought organized crime executions to mind. On top of that, the presence of illegal gambling machines and drugs inside the cafe suggested a motive tied to illicit business, not merely a personal dispute. From the outset, the most important leads were carefully collected. The cafe's CCTV system was extracted, the gambling machines were sealed for fingerprint analysis, and the cafe's income and expense records were seized on suspicion they documented illegal revenue. Investigators also soon realized that Bon More Cafe was only one of many similar cafes in the area where bloody purges had occurred. So did the other cafes share the same kind of hidden underground operating model? From this first impression, a bold hypothesis emerged. There might be a unified criminal operation running a chain of cafes entangled with gambling, stimulants, and even violence used to settle conflicts. To unravel the mystery, police began by identifying the victim. The identification found on him quickly clarified it. He was Brian Lay, 43 years old, a Vietnamese-American, and a regular at Bon More Cafe with no clear criminal record. So was he simply unlucky walking in at the exact moment the purge happened, or had he been targeted from the start? At first, police did not rule out the possibility that Brian Lay had ties to gambling or debts, but there was no direct evidence. In the early days of the investigation, the biggest obstacle was the wall of silence from the community. Not a single witness was willing to cooperate. Many feared retaliation. Some customers even pretended not to know when reporters asked that the cafe was in fact a gambling hangout. Determining the true victim of this case, therefore, did not stop with Brian Lay. It also included the law-abiding Vietnamese community quietly enduring extortion and protection rackets. Police understood they had to identify these silent victims, the shop owners and customers being exploited, in order to trace the crime back to the masterminds. The first real clue surfaced from a piece of evidence that seemed small, yet proved crucial. A note listing a phone number and an amount of money, clipped inside the cafe's ledger. Handwritten in Vietnamese, it laid out weekly contributions marked with strange symbols. Investigators suspected it was a coded record of protection money the cafe was being forced to pay to someone. After decoding and cross-checking, they found several figures matched the denominations tied to the gambling machines that had been seized, meaning the cafe was setting aside part of its gambling revenue and sending it upward. The real victim was beginning to emerge. The cafe owner was being extorted by a criminal group, forced to pay weekly for protection. In a separate development, an unexpected mystery witness surfaced this time from within the San Jose Police Department itself. Around May or June of 2016, as the investigation expanded, the San Jose Police Department's Internal Affairs Unit discovered that an officer appeared to be illegally accessing case files related to the cafe shootings in the system. The investigators were stunned. It meant they might be hunting a mole inside their own ranks. Step by step, specialized investigative techniques were deployed to untie this critical knot. Police secretly set information traps. They created a fake report about a planned raid on a cafe, then monitored whether that sensitive information would leak. Sure enough, the suspect took the bait. The criminal group outside seemed to know the plan in advance and moved the machines and other incriminating evidence out of the location. This strengthened the suspicion that someone was feeding out classified information. With this explosive discovery, the investigation entered a new phase, faster and more cautious than ever, aimed at exposing the full identities of the remaining suspects in the network. Realizing they were up against a large-scale criminal organization, the San Jose Police Department decided to coordinate with the Santa Clara County District Attorney's Office, the Drug Enforcement Administration, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation to expand the scope of the probe. The task force collected preliminary evidence with extreme care. At suspected cafes, undercover officers were planted as customers to observe. They documented on-site betting, gambling machines hidden in back rooms, and tattooed enforcers who regularly came by to collect money at the end of the day. Surveillance footage from cafes where killings had occurred was brought in for analysis, revealing a common pattern. The shooters acted quickly and professionally, consistently aiming straight for the victim's head or chest. Based on ballistic traces, forensic specialists compared shell casings across incidents and noted a recurring type 9mm ammunition. While they could not confirm it was the same firearm, it suggested the shooters may have been drawing from the same weapons supply source. At the same time, forensic evidence from multiple cafe scenes showed a clear presence of stimulants. MDMA tablets and the sedative Xanax were sent to the lab for analysis. Results indicated highly pure Molly and high-dose Xanax, matching the type previously seized from several retail-level dealers in the area. From this, police concluded the cafe network might not only be running gambling operations, but also serving as transit points for contraband. This was a crucial development. Trafficking stimulants is a serious federal offense, providing the legal key for the FBI to step in aggressively and broaden investigative authority across state lines. Indeed, in the summer of 2016, a breakthrough came from another state. Louisiana police stopped a suspicious truck and seized more than 420 pounds, about 190 kilograms of drug-producing leaves that had been concealed and traced back to San Jose. This massive shipment became a key link, confirming that the cafe-based criminal network had extended its reach all the way to Louisiana. The FBI immediately classified the case as an interstate organized crime operation, raising its investigative priority. The drug transport evidence enabled investigators to map an entire trafficking route. In short, product from California, where this type of drug-producing plant was increasingly being legalized for medical purposes, was being funneled to southern states like Louisiana, where black market prices were higher. This showed the group knew exactly how to exploit geography and legal loopholes for profit. The deeper the task force dug, the more layers of the network's tentacles they uncovered. Witness statements, rare but valuable, were gathered discreetly. A server at a cafe, speaking anonymously, secretly provided information that the gang often showed up after midnight, gathered at a reserved table, and kept firearms on the tabletop. They also frequently used physical intimidation against any staff member or customer who crossed them. That account was cross-checked against reports of minor brawls police had handled in the past, and investigators realized the same group of individuals kept appearing again and again. The witnesses' credibility grew even stronger when they added that a cafe called Hun Cafe had been forced to shut down after the owner defied the gang and was threatened with violence in 2015. Clearly, the group had built a tightly controlled protection racket, using violence as a tool of domination. As they narrowed down suspects, police profiled the criminals as Vietnamese men, roughly 20 to 50 years old, bilingual enough to move easily within the community, yet savvy about evading law enforcement. The group appeared to operate with a family-based structure, enabling high secrecy and loyalty. Their recklessness also suggested they may have been involved in serious crimes before, without being caught. This profile aligned with San Jose Police Department gang intelligence records on several Asian gangs that had been active since earlier decades. But this group seemed more sophisticated and tech-savvy. As a result, San Jose Police coordinated with the FBI to launch broad electronic surveillance. They obtained court orders to monitor the phones of several suspects who frequently appeared at multiple late-night cafes. At the same time, they quietly placed GPS trackers on a suspect's vehicle and noticed unusual trips from San Jose down to Orange County in Southern California, specifically the Anaheim area, which also has a large Vietnamese community. That clue suggested the gang had footholds in Anaheim. And indeed, working with Orange County Police, investigators discovered 2 suspicious individuals in Anaheim who were storing contraband for the San Jose group. These surveillance steps helped identify several key suspects, including Kai Nguyen and Chris Sung. Those early wins gave the task force confidence to move on the final, decisive step, launching an all-out strike by arresting the mole inside the San Jose Police Department. From computer access logs, police identified the suspect as Officer Derek Antonio, a veteran with 9 years of service. The discovery left command staff both furious and cautious. They knew that a single misstep could send Antonio running or allow him to warn his associates. So they devised a lure and remove plan. In June of 2016, with evidence that Antonio had accessed sensitive data, the department suspended him on the grounds of an unauthorized computer access investigation. Antonio lost system access, but he was not arrested immediately to avoid tipping off the network. During that period, investigators secretly monitored Antonio. They discovered he was in contact with several Vietnamese individuals already on the suspect list. Although Antonio remained wary, every move he made was documented. Eventually, the evidence was sufficient for the Santa Clara prosecutors to approve an arrest warrant. On August 22, 2016, Derek Antonio was arrested at his home in San Jose by his own colleagues. The news was kept internal until the following day. Antonio became the first domino to fall, clearing the way for a full-scale takedown of the entire gang. With a full body of evidence in hand, police and federal agencies joined forces to prepare the largest crackdown in San Jose history targeting Vietnamese-linked organized crime. They named it Operation Gang of Thrones. The plan mobilized more than 100 officers from the San Jose Police Department, the FBI, the Drug Enforcement Administration, and nearby local agencies. In total, 34 search warrants were approved by the court, spanning multiple cities including San Jose, Santa Clara, Milpitas, Fremont, Anaheim, and a confidential location in the state of Louisiana. At the same time, 29 arrest warrants were also signed for identified suspects. The operation was scheduled for the early morning of August 23, 2016, just one day after the mole, Antonio, was arrested to maximize the element of surprise. At 4 a.m., while the city was still asleep, the raid teams moved out simultaneously. In San Jose, SWAT units split into multiple teams and stormed cafes and suspects' homes. Holcap Cafe on Center Road, also a major hub, was swiftly surrounded, and officers rushed in to secure everyone before they could react. At the same time in Santa Clara, another tactical team kicked in the door of a house in a quiet residential neighborhood, arresting 2 brothers believed to be the gang's treasurers while they were still groggy from sleep. Hundreds of miles away in Anaheim, Orange County authorities also smashed their way into a rental apartment where two Vietnamese suspects connected to the network were hiding. Within a few hours that morning, the entire group was rounded up. Among them were about 7 Vietnamese-American women who served as money collectors and lookouts at the cafes. The suspects were immediately booked into the Santa Clara County Jail pending investigation. Police released the suspect list at a press conference on August 24th, noting that 23 out of the 29 suspects were Vietnamese Americans. One notable figure was Kang Kingsley Chang, 32 years old, who allegedly managed gambling operations and rented a suburban house to store machines and cash for the entire network. Next was Khai Ton Nguyen, about 40 years old, who had previously lived in Orange County before returning to San Jose, and was described as a key contact for moving contraband from California to other locations. Among the female defendants, police highlighted Miss Alina Huang, 26 years old, a young, attractive woman accused of appearing in extortion recordings, speaking in an especially aggressive tone. And the most critical piece, also the most embarrassing for the San Jose Police Department, was Derek Antonio. Meanwhile, the evidence seized in the massive operation was beyond imagination. Police inventoried 5 handguns, hundreds of rounds of ammunition, and 69 gambling machines of various types removed from the cafes. Cash seized totaled more than 200,000 USD, with many stacks hidden in sophisticated ways. One of the seized vehicles even contained a secret compartment holding 100,000 USD in cash. The contraband haul was even more shocking. More than 4,000 ecstasy pills, 300 Xanax pills, 200 MDMA tablets, and a large quantity of steroids. These were found across multiple search locations. As for the drug-producing leaves, the total seized exceeded 600 pounds, about 272 kilograms, including nearly 190 kilograms intercepted in Louisiana while in transit. In addition, police confiscated multiple bulletproof vests, jewelry, phones, computers, and the gang's financial ledgers. And finally, the strangest piece of evidence of all, a live alligator measuring a little over 1 meter long, discovered in the backyard of a suspect's home in San Jose. The alligator was later turned over to local animal control for care. Many speculated the animal was kept either as a pet or as a tool to intimidate debtors, adding yet another bizarre layer to the case. After the operation, 5 suspects were still at large because they were not present at the raid locations. Police announced wanted notices for the remaining individuals, including Phan Tân Phat, Nguyen Van Thai, Lani Vu, Mandy Martinez, Miss Alina Jaslyn Huang, and Phuc De Chun. These were all key links in the chain. One was even believed to have plotted to bribe an officer to buy influence. The fact that several suspects escaped showed just how large the network was, though overall, the core leadership had been captured. From the mountain of evidence and statements they gathered, the task force successfully pieced together the full picture of how this organization formed and how it operated. In the early 2010s, a group of young Vietnamese men in San Jose recognized a lucrative opportunity in community cafes. By day, these cafes were filled with older patrons drinking tea and chatting. But at night, a younger crowd arrived, and the demand for entertainment surged. That's when the group came up with the idea of placing disguised gambling machines inside the cafes to pull in cash. It was a win-win scheme. Owners boosted illegal income, while the gang collected protection fees. At first, the gang had to test the waters and persuade cafe owners. They targeted spots that drew little police attention and offered their service. Some profit-hungry owners agreed immediately, letting machines be installed in hidden corners and splitting the proceeds with the gang. But when owners refused to cooperate, the gang quickly showed its true nature. They sent people to stir up trouble, starting fights and smashing property to intimidate them. These visits from the underworld soon forced cafe owners to back down. Little by little, many Vietnamese cafes in San Jose fell under the gang's control, turning into mini gambling dens at night. The money involved was enormous. Each gambling machine could bring in thousands of USD per week, while the upfront cost of the machine was dirt cheap. The gang simply sat back and collected weekly contributions from the owners. And where money flows, greed follows. The gang expanded into other illegal businesses to maximize profit. They saw that parts of the Vietnamese community had demand for stimulants at parties, so they brazenly began importing and selling them. At the same time, California was gradually legalizing drug-producing leaves, making them cheap and easy to obtain, while many other states still banned them. So the group connected with suppliers and set up a trafficking route all the way to Louisiana, where they could sell at multiple times the price. This showed planning and calculation, not reckless, spur-of-the-moment crime. Other stimulants were sourced through the international black market and distributed within San Jose's nightclub and bar scene. Over time, the gang evolved into a multi-branch criminal enterprise, profiting from gambling, trafficking, contraband, lawn sharking, and more. And all of it funneled back through the cafes used as transaction points and as hubs for laundering money. While expanding its business, the gang also reinforced its power through violence. They didn't hesitate to act brutally against anyone who posed a threat. In April of 2013, at a party at a car wash business called Elite Car Audio, a conflict broke out. Exploiting the chaos, members of the gang attacked Viet Chun, 37 years old, then vanished. In late 2014, one of the gang's members was taken out over a turf dispute. In response, they set up an ambush and shot Tek Zung in retaliation right outside Golden King Cafe. Their message was unmistakable. No one else could touch any cafe inside their territory, and anyone who betrayed them or competed with them would meet a grim end. The four attacks from 2013 to 2016 most likely grew out of that same shadow war to protect an illegal throne. And so for years, the gang lived at the peak of underground power, flush with money. They spent lavishly buying cars, throwing wild parties. They believed no one in the community would dare report them, and over time they began to fantasize that they were kings of this criminal empire. However, the more complacent they became, the more their weaknesses showed. To keep the empire safe, around 2015, the ringleaders decided to buy off a police officer. That officer was Derek Antonio. At first, it was just a casual acquaintance, but little by little he was pulled in. By early 2016, Antonio began leaking internal information to the gang. Whenever police planned to inspect a cafe, he quietly tipped them off so they could remove the machines. Whenever someone in the gang came under suspicion, he accessed the system to check investigative files, then warned them about how serious the threat was. With eyes and ears like Antonio, the gang grew even more confident, believing they had the police in their pocket. But no matter how thick the peel, there's always a sharper nail. Antonio's unusual behavior did not escape the department's notice. In late June of 2016, Antonio was suspended and the criminals lost their shield. They may have sensed something was wrong, but they still believed police would never be able to trace everything. What they didn't know was that law enforcement had been quietly coordinating forces and preparing a massive net. The night of August 22nd, 2016 was likely the gang's last night of freedom. Many members gathered at Truong Cafe to discuss how to respond to the news that Antonio had been detained. They decided to pause the gambling machines for a while, stash some of their goods, and lie low until things settled down. But it was already too late. By the morning of August 23rd, this federal criminal ring had been rounded up by elite teams in Operation Gang of Thrones. On August 25, 2016, the suspects were brought one by one to Santa Clara County Superior Court for arraignment and to hear the charges. Prosecutors laid out a list of crimes the group faced, including extortion, public corruption, trafficking, contraband, assault, unlawful weapons possession, and conspiracy to commit organized crime. Depending on their role, each suspect faced a different set of allegations. After hearing the charges, many defendants appeared calm and entered pleas of not guilty. That was not surprising. It's a common strategy to buy time for attorneys to build a defense. The judge granted bail to some defendants, especially those accused of less serious offenses, under the condition that they post bond. As a result, about half of the 23 suspects were released after posting bail, including former officer Derek Antonio. The court approved his bail at $135,000 USD, and he faced a potential maximum sentence of about 10 years and 4 months in prison if convicted on all counts. Antonio's release on bail sparked controversy, but Chief Garcia reassured the public that the legal process would determine right from wrong and that one individual could not stain the entire San Jose Police Department. In the months that followed, the case was moved to the Santa Clara Superior Court. The legal battle became complicated. Defense attorneys tried to separate each client from any overall conspiracy, arguing that many of them were merely present by coincidence in the wrong place at the wrong time. Prosecutors, meanwhile, steadily stitched the pieces together into a larger picture of an organized criminal enterprise. In court, they presented evidence such as messages between defendants that hinted at collecting protection money, covert video footage showing a suspect receiving a cash bundle from a cafe owner, and most importantly, testimony from several anonymous community witnesses who were willing to come forward after the gang was dismantled. In the end, the weight of the evidence forced some defendants to change course. Instead of gambling on a trial, many chose to negotiate plea deals. They pleaded guilty to charges such as operating an illegal gambling business or possession of contraband with intent to distribute in exchange for prosecutors dropping more serious allegations. This eased the burden on the courts and ensured the offenders were held accountable to a certain extent. One by one, sentences were handed down quietly from 2017 to 2019. According to some reports, the ringleaders received sentences of more than 20 years, others received 5 to 15 years, and some lesser accomplices were given suspended sentences. As for Derek Antonio, because he faced no violent charges, he may have received a sentence of roughly 8 to 10 years for 5 counts of computer intrusion and 1 count of accessory after the fact. He was also permanently fired from the force, stripped of his badge and pension, becoming a costly lesson for the profession. At the beginning of 2023, when the COVID-19 storm had temporarily subsided, US authorities began reviewing how relief funds were used during the pandemic. It was at this moment that something unusual caught the attention of healthcare financial analysts. A small private clinic in Orange County had somehow ranked among the top nationwide in reimbursement claims submitted to the uninsured program. Specifically, the person running this clinic, Dr. Anthony Howden, had submitted reimbursement claims totaling more than $250 million USD and actually received around $150 million USD, accounting for a significant portion of the relief fund. Notably, this amount was the second highest in the entire United States. The absurdity of this triggered auditors' instincts. Something smelled like fraud. They discovered multiple suspicious signs, such as claims for services that the program did not cover, or services that appeared not to have been performed in real life. More strikingly, a large portion of the patients listed in his reimbursement claims were not actually uninsured as reported. Investigations showed that these individuals did have health insurance or were clearly eligible for coverage. For example, one patient was an employee of Amtrak, a major corporation providing insurance for its workers, yet the clinic still listed them as uninsured to obtain government payments. These contradictions in the data prompted auditors to raise the alarm to their superiors. A rapid interagency investigation was launched, marking the beginning of exposing a sophisticated fraud scheme that shocked the nation. This raised a major question. How could a regular clinic request nearly $150 million USD in reimbursements? Was this a system error, or did someone deliberately exploit the chaos of the pandemic for personal gain? What motive could drive a respected medical professional to become such a bold fraudster? These unanswered questions fueled the investigation, with the goal of uncovering the secrets behind this staggering scheme. But before uncovering the truth, we need to understand the background of the case. During the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic from 2020 to 2021, the United States was engulfed in fear as the virus spread at a frightening speed, overwhelming the healthcare system. In Orange County, daily life was equally disrupted. Field hospitals appeared everywhere, businesses shut down, and millions of people lost their jobs and their health insurance. Public security was no longer just about street crime. It had become a battle against a new, invisible enemy, the coronavirus. Amid this chaos, the federal government launched the Uninsured COVID-19 Patient Program as a lifeline. This initiative provided funding for healthcare facilities to offer free COVID-19 testing, treatment, and vaccinations to uninsured patients in an effort to prevent further spread of the virus. It was an unprecedented initiative, one that partly relaxed financial oversight procedures so that relief funds could reach patients as quickly as possible. However, this urgency created loopholes for opportunists, one of whom may be at the center of today's case. After suspicious signs were detected, a large-scale investigation was launched involving multiple law enforcement agencies. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, and the Office of Inspector General for the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS-OIG, took the lead, working with the Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation, to trace the money flow. and the Department of Homeland Security Office of Inspector General, DHS-OIG, to track potential cross-border elements. Notably, the Defense Criminal Investigative Service and the Amtrak Office of Inspector General joined the case because it involved federal employees, such as those from Amtrak, and potentially touched on national security concerns. In California, the State Department of Health assisted by cross-checking patient and insurance records. This joint investigative task force formed a specialized case unit with clearly defined responsibilities. The financial team analyzed banking transactions and uncovered large sums transferred into the investment accounts of Dr. Anthony Hao Dinh. They found 2 transactions of more than 11 million USD each, transferred from the clinic's bank account into his personal investment portfolio. This was clear evidence of money laundering moving fraudulent funds into other channels to obscure their origin. The team also collected bank records showing that approximately 150 million USD had been dispersed to the clinic in multiple installments from the federal fund, only to be quickly withdrawn or transferred elsewhere. The digital forensics team, meanwhile, dug deep into patient and insurance databases. They used algorithms to compare the clinic's reported patient lists with private insurance databases, public insurance records, Medicare, Medicaid, and employee rosters from major companies. The results revealed hundreds of matching names that were already insured, confirming that the clinic had falsified claims. One striking example was the discovery that many Amtrak employees appeared on the clinic's list of uninsured COVID-19 patients submitted for reimbursement. This information strengthened the fraud evidence and explained why Amtrak's internal investigative unit had to join the case to protect the insurance rights of its employees. To prevent the suspect from fleeing, a covert surveillance team was assigned to monitor him at his residence, a home located in the affluent Newport Coast area. They observed that Anthony Hao Dinh's movements in the days leading up to the arrest showed no signs of unusual activity. He went to work and returned home as usual. Perhaps he believed that the fabricated documents he submitted had legitimized everything, or he simply assumed the government would never scrutinize him. After the silent evidence-gathering phase, the decisive moment arrived on April 12, 2023. A nationwide coordinated arrest operation was ordered by the Department of Justice, targeting 18 defendants involved in various COVID-19 fraud schemes, including Dr. Anthony Hao Dinh. In California, FBI agents and U.S. Marshals knocked on his door early in the morning. He was arrested without the chance to resist. On the same day in Florida, his accomplice Matthew Hoang Ho was also arrested at his residence. The remaining accomplice, his sister, Hannah Trindin, was nowhere to be found, as she had disappeared some time earlier. At first, Anthony Hao Dinh did not disclose much and immediately requested an attorney. However, the objective evidence was sufficient to charge him. Just 2 days earlier, on April 10, 2023, a federal agent had submitted a criminal complaint to the court accusing Dr. Anthony Hao Dinh of fraud and conspiracy to commit fraud. Investigators then conducted a search of the doctor's home and collected additional crucial evidence. There, they found several documents related to his stock trading accounts, confirming that a large amount of money had been completely lost due to severe investment losses. With the overwhelming body of evidence, federal prosecutors initiated legal proceedings. On April 20th, 2023, the Department of Justice held a press conference announcing charges against 18 defendants in COVID-19 fraud schemes nationwide. Among them, the case of Dr. Anthony Hao Dinh in Orange County was highlighted as one of the 2 largest cases. They revealed that he was the second highest biller in the entire country under the uninsured program, receiving more than 150 million USD and spending most of it on disastrous speculative investments. This detail shocked the public, painting him more as a reckless gambler than a medical professional. After his arrest, Anthony Hao Dinh was brought before the court for the first hearing. The judge ruled that he could be released only on a bail amount of 7 million USD. This unusually high figure reflected both the seriousness of the case and the defendant's potential flight risk. Ultimately, he had to submit property collateral to obtain temporary freedom. But strict security conditions were imposed, surrendering his passport, travel restrictions, and constant monitoring by law enforcement. Meanwhile, after several months on the run, his sister Hannah Dinh was also arrested in the summer of 2023. The remaining accomplice, Hoang Ho, was detained in Florida awaiting trial. By late September 2023, a federal grand jury officially indicted Dr. Anthony Hao Dinh on 18 serious charges, including 12 counts of wire fraud related to submitting false reimbursement claims, 5 counts of money laundering for transferring illegal funds into stock accounts, including 2 transfers exceeding 11 million USD, and 1 count of obstruction of justice for submitting falsified medical records to the grand jury. The indictment also added details of fraud in the PPP, EIDL programs, charging Dr. Dinh and his accomplices with filing approximately 65 loan applications to steal 2.8 million USD from these programs. And this is where an unexpected twist occurred. As mentioned earlier, from the moment they were arrested, Dr. Anthony Hao Dinh and his 2 accomplices remained largely silent. When defendants fail to reach an early plea agreement, they must face a full and uncompromising indictment from prosecutors, meaning the authorities can charge every possible offense, each carrying maximum penalties. This grim outlook terrified Dr. Dinh's sister. And then, in early October 2023, Hannah Dinh suddenly pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit wire fraud and admitted that she had helped fabricate business documents to obtain more than $260,000 in COVID relief funds. In return, she could receive leniency on the remaining charges. More importantly, she agreed to cooperate as a government witness in the case against Dr. Anthony Hao Dinh. This meant the sister had turned against her own brother in hopes of reducing her sentence. Her decision became a devastating blow, one that pierced through the final line of defense of the once respected physician. He quickly crumbled behind bars. According to the later indictment, 3 primary fraud tactics were carried out in parallel. First, the doctor intentionally misclassified insured patients as uninsured. Many of these individuals had private insurance or employer-provided insurance and therefore were not eligible for federal reimbursement under the uninsured program. Yet he bypassed this requirement by omitting their insurance information entirely, allowing him to collect full reimbursement from the federal fund. Second, he inflated and fabricated medical services that never actually occurred. He reported that numerous COVID-19 tests and treatment procedures had been performed even though they were never provided. By simply entering medical service codes into reimbursement forms, he could easily turn non-existent medical procedures into payable claims. It must be said that during the peak of the pandemic, cross-checking whether a service was truly performed was extremely lax, and he exploited this vulnerability to the fullest for personal gain. Third, the doctor billed for medically unnecessary services or for services not covered under the program. For instance, he might have falsely claimed that he treated severe COVID-19 complications for patients who, in reality, merely tested positive via a rapid test and self-isolated. Or he requested reimbursement for routine checkups or supplemental tests that were not eligible for payment under the program. His goal was to extract as much money as possible from each patient, regardless of legitimacy. Over the course of 9 months, from July 2020 to March 2021, using these tactics, the greedy doctor siphoned roughly 150 million USD into his clinic accounts. This staggering amount equaled the budget needed to treat tens of thousands of real patients. At its peak, it meant he was earning millions of USD in relief funds each day. During the same period in late 2020 to early 2021, he colluded with his sister and a friend, Matthew Ho Hong Ho, to defraud government pandemic business loan programs. Specifically, they submitted dozens of loan applications through the PPP and EIDL programs, falsifying business information to secure loans and then pocket the proceeds. Through this scheme, the trio successfully stole 2.8 million USD in relief loans. Although this amount was much smaller than the 150 million USD stolen from the healthcare fund, this organized deceit demonstrated that the seemingly respectable doctor left no scheme untapped in his pursuit of illicit profit. He drained funds meant for sick patients while simultaneously reaching into small business relief programs to enrich himself. Ultimately, after more than a year of investigation, authorities reached a definitive conclusion. Dr. Anthony Hao Dinh was the mastermind behind the largest fraud scheme targeting the national uninsured COVID-19 program. From a few initial suspicious data points, investigators painstakingly unraveled the tangled web of complex financial records, piecing them together to reveal the horrifying truth. This investigative journey reaffirmed a timeless principle. No matter how sophisticated the crime, the traces left behind will eventually expose the perpetrator. And sometimes, it is the criminal's own boundless greed that paves the way for justice. Had Dr. Dinh not demanded such an exorbitant amount of money, he might never have drawn the attention of federal investigators and might not have been caught so quickly. Notably, before this case, Dr. Anthony Hao Dinh had a very good reputation within the community. He was a Vietnamese-American residing in the wealthy Newport Coast area of Orange County, California. On the surface, Anthony had an admirable professional resume. He graduated as a doctor of osteopathic medicine, specialized in otolaryngology, and also held a certification in cosmetic surgery. Before the scandal broke, Dr. Dinh operated 2 private clinics in Westminster and Garden Grove areas with a large Vietnamese population. With extensive expertise in ENT medicine, he had earned strong trust from many Vietnamese patients. There was no record of previous legal violations or medical disciplinary actions, meaning he had a completely clean background until this crime. In terms of family, Anthony Hao Dinh had an older sister, Trin Hannah Dinh, age 65, living in Lake Forest, California. He did not commit the fraud alone. This sister actively participated in the scheme involving fraudulent loan applications. As for the motive, there was no doubt. It was driven by insatiable greed. The pandemic had created a massive and easily accessible pool of government funds, and Dr. Dinh could not resist the temptation. He might have convinced himself that he was simply taking advantage of government money and not harming anyone directly. Some speculate that at the beginning he genuinely treated a few uninsured patients, received extremely generous reimbursements, and then greed slowly took root. Gradually, the ease of submitting fake claims, just file them and the money arrives, pulled him deeper into wrongdoing. Once he realized he could make tens of millions of USD without lifting a finger, his greed spiraled out of control. He shifted to a second motive, investing to multiply his wealth even further. In other words, Dr. Dinh did not merely want extra cash for spending, he wanted rapid and immense growth of his assets. Derivatives trading, with its promise of multiplying capital, attracted him like a moth drawn to flame. This behavior set him apart from many other financial criminals, as they typically launder or splurge their illicit gains instead of throwing the money into such high-risk speculation. This mindset revealed a perpetrator who was both greedy and arrogant, believing he was too clever to face consequences, either in fraud or in investing. Importantly, the victim of Dr. Dinh was not a specific individual, but an entire public healthcare relief initiative, the HRSA Uninsured COVID-19 program. The program was established in early 2020 by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services to ensure that uninsured individuals could receive free COVID-19 testing and treatment. It relied on the trust that healthcare providers would submit truthful cost reports for government reimbursement. But some doctors betrayed that trust, siphoning more than 150 million USD from the government. As a result, the program was forced to shut down early due to depleted funds, leaving long-term consequences. Many low-income patients afterward might no longer have access to essential support, and public trust in federal relief programs suffered significant damage. After his crimes were exposed, the image of Anthony Hao Dinh, once a respected and reputable doctor, instantly collapsed, turning him into a public enemy. Both English and Vietnamese media reported on the case, using harsh phrases such as stealing COVID relief funds from taxpayers. In the eyes of the public, he became a symbol of opportunism and betrayal during a national crisis when countless decent people were sacrificing, yet someone like him exploited the chaos for personal gain. While Dr. Dinh awaited trial, his accomplices began facing their own judgments. Trin Hannah Dinh, after pleading guilty to conspiracy to commit fraud, appeared in court for sentencing on February 12, 2024. The federal court in Orange County sentenced her to 20 months in prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release, with the first 7 months under home confinement with electronic monitoring. The sentence was relatively light compared to the maximum possible penalties, thanks to her cooperation with authorities and the fact that her fraudulent amount was $260,000. Even so, it demonstrated that the law strictly punishes any misuse of relief funds. Hannah Dinh expressed remorse in court and pledged to repay the amount she had stolen. As for Matthew Ho Hong Ho, he was prosecuted in a separate Florida case involving PPP EIDL-related charges. He initially pled not guilty and was scheduled for trial in February 2024, but due to issues in changing attorneys, the hearing was postponed. Meanwhile, the trial of Dr. Anthony Dinh may take place later this year. If convicted, he faces extremely severe penalties. Each count of wire fraud can carry up to 20 years in prison, each money laundering count can carry up to 10 or 20 years, and obstruction of justice also carries a maximum of 20 years. In theory, the combined maximum sentence could exceed an entire century behind bars. Although the sentences could be consolidated to reduce the total time, a potential life sentence still looms over Anthony Dinh if he does not plead guilty soon. Furthermore, the court will certainly order him to repay the stolen funds, even though most of it has evaporated into failed stock market speculation, and impose additional fines totaling millions of USD. All valuable personal assets, such as his home or retirement accounts, may also be subject to forfeiture to repay the federal fund. In the end, what comes from the sky returns to the earth. Dr. Anthony Dinh could lose everything: his wealth, his reputation, and even his medical license. It is a fitting price for someone educated and privileged, with high social and economic status, who chose to exploit society's darkest moment for personal gain. Painful, but deserved. In April 2011, users in several United States suddenly began receiving suspicious promotional emails. The strange part was that these emails were sent to addresses the users had only provided to major corporations, banks, supermarkets, retail chains, and had never shared publicly. For example, one customer discovered that his secondary inbox, used exclusively for a major bank, received an email offering to buy Adobe Reader 10, a program that should be free, for $65. Meanwhile, another customer of a well-known retail chain received the same spam message at an email address used solely for the store's membership card. A wave of identical complaints alarmed major corporations, leading them to suspect their email marketing service providers had been compromised. And the suspicion turned out to be correct. On April 2nd, 2011, one of the largest email service providers in the United States publicly admitted that its system had been breached, exposing customer email databases belonging to many major brands. An urgent alert was immediately sent to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Shortly after, FBI Atlanta, the field office responsible for the region where the affected company was located, dispatched cybercrime agents to investigate the digital crime scene. As soon as investigators accessed the company's server environment, they realized the scale was enormous. The hacker had not targeted just one company, but multiple email service providers across the United States. Every footprint the intruder left behind indicated a highly organized, sophisticated attack, carefully obscured. Digital forensic engineers began tracing tiny fragments of evidence, odd IP addresses and server logs, several infected employee machines, and hundreds of gigabytes of data silently exfiltrated. From here, forensic specialists reconstructed the timeline. Beginning in late March 2011, the hacker infiltrated the database and quietly downloaded customer lists from hundreds of major corporations, explaining why customers from completely different companies received the same spam at the same time. The first key findings included: 1. Malware had been installed on an employee's computer, opening a backdoor for the hacker to control the system remotely. 2. The employee's admin credentials were used to access restricted data. And 3. All stolen data had been transmitted to a server located in the Netherlands. The fact that the attacker's server was hosted overseas immediately signaled an international cyber attack far beyond a simple phishing scam. FBI agents grew tense. If the hacker was really operating from the Netherlands or another foreign country, identifying him would be extremely difficult. And indeed, the investigation that followed dragged on for years, enduring countless challenges, from analyzing the digital crime scene, tracing technical clues, to coordinating international cooperation to hunt down the offender. At first, investigators believed this might be the work of a large, organized cybercriminal syndicate, simultaneously breaching multiple companies, stealing record-breaking amounts of data, and launching massive spam attacks required significant resources and expertise. However, a bolder theory also emerged, that all of this could have been carried out by a single super hacker. Without enough evidence, investigators refused to rule out any possibility and began working on both fronts. As they examined the digital crime scenes, computer forensics experts from the FBI and the US Secret Service jointly dissected the compromised servers. They discovered the hackers' intrusion method was highly sophisticated. First, phishing emails crafted specifically for employees of targeted companies were sent out. These spoofed emails often contained links to cleverly disguised malicious websites, such as invitations to view wedding photos or greeting cards, tempting employees to click. Once the victim clicked, malware silently installed itself on the computer, stealing passwords and opening a backdoor into the internal network. The hacker then logged in using the employee's legitimate credentials, so no unusual activity was detected at first. From inside, he escalated privileges to access marketing databases and carry out large-scale data theft. Even more cunning, he leveraged the victim company's own infrastructure for the next phase. After stealing customer email lists, he didn't log out. Instead, he used the company's official mail servers to blast spam to the newly stolen addresses. This detail astonished investigators, as it meant the hacker had fully hijacked the systems of reputable email providers. As a result, the spam bypassed filters and was delivered successfully because it originated from legitimate corporate servers. Thanks to these tactics, the attack operated on an enormous scale without detection. Tens of millions of spam emails were sent every day during the period the hacker maintained control of the system. From an investigative standpoint, this discovery was both bad and good news. Bad because it showed how cunning the attacker was, but good because the activity left traceable logs on the victim's own servers, providing clear forensic evidence. Alongside technical forensics, the FBI also interviewed witnesses, employees of the hacked companies, especially those who had unknowingly clicked the initial phishing emails. They provided details about the email content, the time they received it, and what actions they took. The statements were highly reliable since the events occurred directly on their machines. However, a small inconsistency surfaced. At first, some employees believed they were merely victims of an isolated virus attack unrelated to others. Only after investigators shared their findings did they realize they were all pieces of a much larger coordinated scheme. Once the hacker's attack path was mapped out, advanced investigative techniques were deployed to uncover his identity. The FBI's cybercrime division mobilized specialists in online offender identification. Based on patterns of behavior, they drew a preliminary profile, a hacker with deep knowledge of email marketing systems, possibly someone who had worked in the industry or collaborated with insiders. Someone skilled in crafting malware, evading detection, and deploying remote control tools on compromised machines. His choice of a server located in Deventer, the Netherlands, as a relay point also suggested he understood hosting infrastructure and international legal frameworks, since the Netherlands has strong internet infrastructure and relatively tolerant hosting policies. These observations led investigators to suspect the offender was young, around 20 to 30 years old, highly technical, and likely from a country with an active hacker community. The FBI immediately sent a request to the Dutch internet service provider through its legal attaché office in The Hague and the MLAT Mutual Legal Assistance Channel to obtain information about the IP address owner of the suspicious server. However, just as predicted, the server had been registered under a fabricated or vague identity. Even so, the Netherlands agreed to cooperate further. By August 2012, after many months of preparation, the FBI and Dutch police executed a bold operation, raiding the physical server location and the suspected residence of the hacker in the city of Deventer. The raid took place at dawn. A tactical team quietly surrounded a small apartment on the edge of the city, the place where the server's internet subscription was registered. When the door was kicked open, agents rushed in and subdued the people inside. There, they arrested a 25-year-old Vietnamese man named Giang Hoang Vu. Along with Vu, numerous electronic devices, computers, and data-filled hard drives were seized. However, agents were stunned to discover signs that the apartment was the headquarters of at least 2 hackers, and that another individual had likely lived there but escaped or was simply not present at the time. More importantly, that missing individual was highly likely to be the mastermind. Fortunately, after being arrested, Giang Hoang Vu quickly admitted his role as an assistant in the spam operation. He also revealed the identity of someone far more significant, the mastermind, who had vanished. Viet Quoc Nguyen, 25 years old. also from Vietnam. Nguyen had lived with Vu for a period in the Netherlands, but before police arrived, he had already left. There was information indicating that Nguyen sensed danger and fled back to Vietnam, where he had family and where no extradition treaty with the United States existed. Although Nguyen had not yet been arrested, identifying his full identity marked a breakthrough in the investigation. From here, the FBI shifted strategy, targeting the remaining links in the network while applying pressure that would eventually force Nguyen to surface. Expanding the investigation, the FBI discovered that to profit from the stolen email databases, Nguyen and Vu had partnered with a third party. Tracing the money trail from sales of the counterfeit Adobe software, the FBI uncovered an affiliate marketing company called MarketBay.com. This company was based in Canada and co-founded by David Manuel Santos da Silva, a Montreal businessman. MarketBay's affiliate marketing operations were precisely how Nguyen converted the stolen email lists into money. In simple terms, Nguyen sent advertisements to the stolen email addresses. When victims clicked the link, they were redirected to a website built by Nguyen but managed under MarketBay's platform. If a user paid for the software even though it was counterfeit or pirated, MarketBay processed the payment, delivered the product, and paid Nguyen a commission for every successful transaction. To visualize it, it was no different from doing affiliate marketing for Shopee, Lazada, or Amazon, except here, Vu and Nguyen had illegally infiltrated email service systems to steal addresses and send them fake products and services. Realizing MarketBay's crucial role, US authorities continued secretly gathering evidence against Da Silva. Investigators discovered that from 2009 to 2011, Nguyen and Da Silva earned approximately $2 million USD through selling software via massive spam campaigns. Da Silva knew very well that the traffic Nguyen provided came from stolen email databases, but driven by greed, he turned a blind eye and shared profits with Nguyen. By early 2015, once the evidence had been fully reinforced, US authorities decided it was time to act. They secretly obtained an arrest warrant for Da Silva and waited for the right moment. In February 2015, the moment Da Silva stepped off the plane at Fort Lauderdale International Airport in Florida, he was immediately arrested by the FBI. However, Da Silva's arrest was kept strictly confidential until authorities were ready to unveil the entire case. At the same time, another link in the chain was identified Sven Olaf Kamfuis, Sven Fransen, a German businessman living in the Netherlands. He operated the company Certo, Multibill, which specialized in online payment processing services. Investigators discovered that Multibill had processed more than 1.5 million USD in transactions for pirated software distributed by MarketBay, despite obvious signs of fraud and copyright violations. Moreover, Fransen not only turned a blind eye, but even advised Da Silva on how to disguise the true nature of the products when financial partners raised red flags. Clearly, to keep this illegal money-making operation running smoothly, Viet Quoc Nguyen had built an entire cybercrime alliance involving hackers, spam specialists, affiliate marketers, and payment processors. By late 2015, nearly the entire puzzle had been revealed. Zhang Huang Vu had been arrested and confessed. David Santos da Silva and Sven Fransen had been taken down one by one. Only Viet Quoc Nguyen, the mastermind, remained missing. He was the true architect behind the high-tech intrusions, while the others were mostly operators and beneficiaries. In fact, as early as October 2012, a federal grand jury in Atlanta had issued an indictment of 29 criminal counts against Viet Quoc Nguyen, age 28, and Giang Hoang Vu, age 25. But it was not until March 2015 that the indictment was unsealed and publicly released, by which time nearly all the co-conspirators had been neutralized. However, capturing Nguyen remained a massive challenge as he was hiding far outside the reach of US law enforcement. So who is Viet Quoc Nguyen, and how cunning must he be to evade the FBI's pursuit until this very day? According to available information, Nguyen was born in 1987 in Vietnam, which means that when he launched his first attacks in 2009, he was only about 22 years old. There's little information about his family or upbringing, only that he had lived in the Netherlands for a period and may have studied or worked in IT while there. The FBI described Nguyen as approximately 1 meter 83 tall, 90 kilograms in weight, with pitted acne scars on his skin. He was believed to use online aliases such as Peter Wine, Peter Norman, and Van de Heu, suggesting he was highly experienced in digital anonymity. Interestingly, in a circulated profile image, Nguyen appeared scholarly and mild-mannered, completely different from the stereotypical image of a cold-blooded cybercriminal. Prior to this case, there was no information indicating he had any criminal record. He lived entirely in the shadows of the internet. This has led to speculation that Nguyen may have been part of a self-taught hacker group that grew out of underground forums. Some even believe he originated from the spammer community, learned how to make money through illegal advertising tactics, and eventually developed larger ambitions. Nguyen's motive appears clear: financial gain. Prosecutors allege that he and his partners earned millions of USD through stolen data and spam campaigns. But more deeply, Nguyen may have been driven by a desire to conquer data fortresses, an ambition that very few hackers dared pursue at that time. Additionally, simultaneously, attacking nearly 10 major US corporations required both recklessness and arrogance, which may have given him a sense of achievement after pulling it off. Giang Hoang Vu, Nguyen's accomplice, was born around 1990. Also Vietnamese, Vu traveled to the Netherlands and collaborated with Nguyen from 2010 to 2012. Nguyen and Vu may have known each other from Vietnam or met online before deciding to work together for profit. Within the group, Vu served as an assistant, helping execute spam campaigns and possibly managing several servers. One of his known aliases was Lee Vu. Vu was less skilled and less prominent than Nguyen, but far more unlucky, as he was caught red-handed. The trial unfolded mainly from 2015 to 2017 at the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Georgia in Atlanta. There were no intense battles between prosecution and defense, because all defendants who had been arrested had already pleaded guilty under negotiated agreements. The first was Giang Hoang Vu. After pleading guilty to conspiracy to commit computer intrusion in February 2015, Vu awaited sentencing. At the sentencing hearing on 27 July 2015, Judge Timothy C. Batten Sr. considered Vu's cooperation during the investigation. Because Vu had substantially helped expose the entire network, prosecutors recommended a sentence below the guideline range. In the end, the court imposed 24 months in federal prison, a lighter sentence than many had expected. Public reaction was largely positive, with many viewing the sentence as a textbook example of leniency granted in exchange for crucial information in a high-tech crime case. As for David Manuel Santos da Silva, he was charged with conspiracy to commit money laundering and faced up to 20 years in prison. In court, prosecutors detailed da Silva's role, explaining that he knowingly profited from funds derived from criminal hacking activity. Initially, da Silva refused to plead guilty, but later, likely influenced by his defense counsel, he changed course and entered a guilty plea on 2 November 2015. On 14 June 2017, he was sentenced to 51 months in prison, or 4 years and 3 months. The sentence reflected some consideration of mitigating factors. In his final statement, da Silva expressed remorse, apologized to victims, and admitted his mistake in blindly chasing profit. Sven Olaf. Sven Fransson also faced a conspiracy to launder money charge similar to da Silva, though his case was handled later. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 30 months in prison on 11 December 2017. During sentencing, prosecutors emphasized that Fransson had facilitated laundering more than 1.5 million USD, despite repeated warnings about the illegality of the transactions. The forfeiture of his assets, including his home and yacht, demonstrated that he had profited substantially from the criminal scheme. However, because the defendant was already 53 years old, his attorney sought leniency on health grounds, and Fransson had accepted responsibility for his actions. Ultimately, the judge imposed a 2.5-year sentence sufficiently deterrent, yet not excessively harsh for a defendant who had cooperated. Meanwhile, Viet Quoc Nguyen remains a fugitive, and the court has issued a warrant for his arrest. The charges against Nguyen are extremely serious: conspiracy to commit wire fraud, conspiracy to commit computer intrusion, fraud, identity theft, and more. 29 counts in total. If convicted on all charges, Nguyen could face decades in prison, potentially 40 to 50 years. Prosecutor Leslie Caldwell once declared that the government was determined to bring Nguyen to justice in the United States. After the case became public, the phrase, "hack 1 billion emails," flooded US. Media from Reuters and AP to technology outlets like Wired and Krebs and Security. Many newspapers even called it the largest email theft in history. Nearly a dozen US companies were direct victims of the attack. First and foremost was Epsilon, the world's largest email marketing provider, managing email programs for hundreds of major brands, including Citigroup, JP Morgan Chase, Barclays, Kroger, Walgreens, Marriott. Founded in 1969, Epsilon was considered the email treasurer of the United States, storing massive data sets containing names, email addresses, and customer information for countless corporations. The nature of its work required the highest levels of security. Yet, ironically, it also made the company an extremely attractive target for hackers. At the time of the attack, Epsilon had been preparing for its spring 2011 marketing campaigns, but was forced to halt all operations to recover from the breach. As a result, Epsilon's reputation suffered severely, clients lost confidence, and the company had to spend substantial sums to help corporate customers notify millions of end users about the incident. Following Epsilon were 8 smaller companies scattered across various US states. Most of these were mid-sized businesses specializing in bulk email services for corporate clients. In total, from these companies alone, more than 1 billion email addresses fell into the hands of criminals. With such data, malicious actors could launch highly sophisticated phishing campaigns or sell the information on the dark market, turning the stolen emails into targets for countless future scams. The case also served as a powerful warning. First, for businesses. The security of what seems like just email data must never be underestimated. A single vulnerability, such as an employee clicking the wrong link, can trigger a catastrophe for an entire system. Organizations must build a culture of vigilance, conduct regular security testing, and maintain clear, practiced incident response protocols. Second, for individual users, be cautious with your personal information, even something as simple as an email address. Use different email accounts for different purposes to avoid putting all your eggs in one basket. And when receiving emails, even from familiar senders, always verify signs of phishing before following any instructions. Now, 10 years later, a full decade has passed. Viet Quoc Nguyen remains completely invisible, as if he vanished from the face of the earth. The FBI continues to keep an active warrant for him and asserts that Nguyen will be brought before a US court the moment he is caught. So what do you think? Where has he gone? Could he have returned to Vietnam and quietly joined other cyber operations? In late 2023, a group of journalists from Heist, a public news outlet in Los Angeles, carefully traced publicly available charity records and found something alarming. A charity called Vietnamese-American Society, led by a young woman named Rhiannon Do, had quietly received an enormous sum, up to 13 million USD, from the county's relief funds during the period from 2020 to 2023. This had never been discussed in any public meeting of the Board of Supervisors. Worse still, Rhiannon Do turned out to be the daughter of Supervisor Andrew Do, who had been granted the authority to spend relief funds within his district without needing approval from the board. Clearly, this was a serious conflict of interest that Do had never disclosed. It became increasingly clear that something was wrong with Orange County's relief program, and that the people who were supposed to receive support may not have received anything at all. The discovery immediately ignited public attention and pushed authorities to step in. At 8 o'clock in the morning on August 22nd, 2023, in a quiet neighborhood in Tustin, Orange County, residents watched in shock as federal agents raided and searched Rhiannon Do home. Around the same time, another investigative team approached the residence of Supervisor Andrew Do. After seizing Vietnamese-American Society's financial reports, investigators found that only about 15% of the money the organization received, around 1.4 million USD out of more than 10 million USD in funding, was actually used to provide charitable meals. The remaining 85% of the budget appeared to have evaporated from the records. Investigators also noted key early red flags. Many documents and invoices showed signs of being forged or sloppily copied, suggesting someone had deliberately tried to cover the money trail. Bank accounts linked to Vietnamese-American Society also showed funds being transferred back and forth through multiple intermediary entities. Most notably, investigators discovered unusually large cash withdrawals from ATM and real estate investments purchased under the names of individuals connected to the organization. These signs raised a major suspicion. Had relief money been stolen to buy private homes and pay off personal debts? Immediately, The investigative team understood they were dealing with a highly complex, organized scheme to embezzle public funds. If so, who were the direct victims, or had every Orange County taxpayer been harmed? To answer that question, investigators had to follow the trail to identify the people who should have benefited from the missing funds. They reviewed the list of seniors registered to receive free meals and checked each food distribution route that Viet-America Society claimed it had carried out. But a major obstacle surfaced immediately. Viet-America Society had never submitted an independent audit report on how the money was used. In fact, under the rules, it was required to do so every year, yet it had been delayed for the past 2 years without any legitimate explanation. The absence of audit reports left investigators in the dark about the detailed money flow at the outset. They had to dig through bank records, analyze transactions, and even review security camera footage at several food distribution sites to determine whether the operations actually happened as reported. And when they compared the money Viet-America Society received with the amounts truly spent on services, gaps worth tens of millions of USD began to emerge. That missing money corresponded to services that were never delivered as promised. In other words, thousands of people who should have received food did not receive enough or received nothing at all. And that list, tragically, was made up largely of Vietnamese seniors and low-income residents in Orange County. Another clue, seemingly small but ultimately pivotal, was the written commitment Viet-America Society and hand-to-hand signed with the county. They promised to return any unused funds if the money was not fully spent on relief. But for years, not a single dollar was returned even after the program ended, clear evidence of deception by the very people running it. Social workers in Orange County also said they had received complaints from some seniors that subsidized meals arrived inconsistently. Some months they got deliveries, other months they did not, with no clear reason. A 75-year-old Vietnamese woman said she received only a few boxes of cold food during the long lockdown period, and then no one delivered meals again, even though her name was on the assistance list. These accounts, though fragmented, helped confirm one thing. The victims were the most vulnerable, stripped of benefits they were entitled to receive. As the investigation progressed, forensic financial analysis was applied aggressively. Investigators from the FBI and the IRS examined every transfer from county accounts to Viet-America Society and hand-to-hand. They discovered that soon after the money reached Viet-America Society's accounts, most of it was quickly forwarded to a private company named Aloha Financial Investment, also known as D Air Conditioning LLC, managed by a friend of Pham. From that company, checks were then written to a person with the surname Pham and a person with the surname Doe, very likely Peter Pham and one of Andrew Doe's 2 daughters. This was the turning point. The dense chain of transactions showed that relief money had been laundered and split all the way into the hands of those involved. At this point, the victims became unmistakably clear. Orange County residents as a whole, and more specifically, seniors and people with disabilities in the relief program, were the victims of this crime. Their meals were stolen, and the help meant for them was taken away. The investigation quickly expanded with multiple agencies joining in. The FBI, the Orange County District Attorney's Office, and the Internal Revenue Service, IRS, all became involved. They formed a joint task force with clearly assigned roles. One team traced the flow of money, another gathered electronic evidence such as emails and text messages, while another interviewed witnesses and relevant individuals. Evidence analysis moved fast. Every document obtained from Viet-America Society and hand-to-hand was scrutinized. Forensic accountants compared Viet-America Society's spending reports submitted to the county against the actual bank statements. Unsurprisingly, they uncovered a string of forged or misleading records. Food purchase invoices listed quantities far beyond what was actually bought, and service payment vouchers were issued by shell companies. Many documents bearing the signatures of Peter Pham and Than Hung Nguyen, the director of Hand to Hand, certified that all funds were used for their intended purpose. Yet the real-world transactions showed the money had been diverted. Investigators also obtained internal emails among Andrew Doe's staff that pointed to highly unusual interference. Specifically, Andrew Doe, chief of staff, had instructed subordinates to revise the contract before it was signed with Viet-America Society, removing a clause that required Viet-America Society to submit detailed monthly reports. That detail immediately strengthened the theory of an inside job, a coordinated scheme to siphon public funds from within the government itself. On the digital forensics front, FBI agents recovered data from computers seized at Rhiannon Do's home. They found payroll records and her employment contract with Vietnamese-American Society, confirming that Rhiannon was paid $8,000 per month from 2021 through early 2024, totaling $224,000. Moreover, although her contract listed her title as project director, there were no corresponding concrete work reports. Another email showed Rhiannon sending her bank account information to Peter Pham shortly before $381,500 was transferred into an escrow account to buy a house for her. These details painted a broader picture of fraud. Rhiannon Do appeared to be a direct beneficiary of illicit funds, and through her, Andrew Do allegedly received bribes indirectly. As the probe widened, the FBI also found that D Air Conditioning LLC was in fact Aloha Financial Investment, a business registered under Thu Thao Thi Vu, a Vietnamese woman. She received hundreds of thousands of USD from Vietnamese-American Society and then wrote checks to Andrew Do's daughter and to Peter Pham himself. Thu Thao Vu was promptly summoned. During questioning, her statements were riddled with contradictions. She denied participating in bribery, claiming she was merely lending money to help Andrew Do and his daughter buy a home, because Vietnamese-American Society had pressured her to assist. She also insisted she did not know the money came from criminal activity. Her explanation attempted to distance Aloha from the bribery scheme, but inadvertently confirmed that large sums had, in fact, been routed to Andrew Do family. In parallel, investigators interviewed a number of peripheral witnesses. Orange County social workers confirmed that the meal program run by Vietnamese-American Society had serious issues. Whenever they demanded transparency or questioned why meal counts were so low compared with the budget, Andrew Do's office brushed them off. One county staffer, speaking anonymously out of fear of retaliation, also said she had been instructed to not ask too many questions when processing payments for Vietnamese-American Society. These statements reinforce the allegation that Andrew Do's power was used to silence internal concerns and conceal wrongdoing. As the evidence grew thicker by the day, investigators activated a specialized technique: criminal psychological profiling. Experts identified a common behavioral pattern. Public corruption crimes are usually driven by greed and opportunity rather than sudden impulse. Andrew Do, Peter Pham, and Than Hung Nguyen all had a clear financial motive: millions of USD in public funds. They also had a major opportunity. Andrew controlled budget approvals, while Pham and Nguyen already had organizations in place to receive the money. Most importantly, they were bound by personal ties, friendship between Do and Pham, and the close relationship between Do and his subordinates. Together, these factors formed a perfect formula for a scheme to siphon government funds. Guided by this profile, investigators narrowed in on the right targets and eliminated most peripheral suspects. Indeed, apart from the trio, Do, Pham, and Nguyen, there were no signs that other supervisors or officials were involved. As a result, every investigative thread converged on this group. But that conclusion also stunned investigators, because they still remembered how Andrew Do had once been celebrated as a community hero during the pandemic. Earlier, he had even appeared in Vietnamese-American Society promotional videos praising Peter Pham as a selfless hero of the community. That bitter irony underscored just how brazen the suspects were, how a thief can play the role of a good person smoothly enough to mask every wrongdoing. Once the evidence became undeniable, authorities moved into the arrest and prosecution phase. Because Andrew Do was an elected official, the investigation into him was conducted discreetly to avoid political fallout. After the August 2023 searches, federal prosecutors began negotiating with Do's attorneys. Knowing he could not plausibly deny the allegations, Andrew Do agreed to plead guilty in exchange for leniency. In October 2024, he reached a plea deal on a charge of conspiracy to accept bribes tied to federally sourced funds. In return, prosecutors agreed not to pursue additional charges and not to charge his two daughters. Andrew Do then resigned and reported to the FBI to complete the guilty plea process. Meanwhile, Than Hung Nguyen was arrested and charged under a separate indictment. She faced counts including conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and money laundering, each carrying a maximum sentence of 20 years in prison. Nguyen was allowed to remain out on bail after posting bond while awaiting court proceedings. Peter Pham, however, was the most complicated case. The FBI determined he had left the United States in late 2024 on a one-way flight to Taiwan, and there had been no indication he had departed since. A warrant was issued, and his name was added to the FBI's wanted list. But because the United States and Taiwan do not have an extradition treaty, efforts to apprehend Pham faced a major obstacle. Instead, federal prosecutors prepared a sealed indictment to be ready to pursue charges in absentia. Thus, by early June 2025, a federal grand jury formally indicted Peter and Pham, 65, and Tran Hung Nguyen, 61, on a total of 15 counts, Pham facing all charges, while Nguyen faced 3. On June 6, 2025, the indictment was publicly unsealed, and Peter Pham was officially deemed a wanted fugitive. The sentencing hearing for former supervisor Andrew Do took place on June 9, 2025 at the federal courthouse in Santa Ana. This was a sentencing hearing because Do had already pleaded guilty, so there was no trial on the merits, only arguments over punishment. Federal prosecutors sought a 5-year prison sentence, arguing it was the maximum allowed and warranted given the seriousness of the case. They stated bluntly, as a supervisor, Andrew Do turned Orange County into an ATM for his family, siphoning off millions of dollars to buy homes and fund lavish parties, while vulnerable seniors who needed him were left behind. Prosecutor Todd Spitzer argued that when the county and the country were at their weakest and most vulnerable during the pandemic, the defendant saw an opportunity to profit for himself. He said it was a betrayal of the trust of hundreds of thousands of residents and could be viewed as a form of silent sabotage, no less dangerous than violence, because it corrodes the public's trust in government. For that reason, prosecutors insisted the court should impose the maximum sentence as a deterrent, calling Andrew Do conduct an attack on the legitimacy of government. Meanwhile, Andrew Do, defense attorney, asked for a lighter sentence, about 3 years in prison. The defense argued that their client didn't pocket a single dollar, claiming the large transfers went to his daughter Rhiannon and that Do did not intend to enrich himself. In other words, they portrayed him as acting blindly out of parental love, mistakenly believing his daughter was truly helping the community and therefore deserved to benefit. The defense also described Andrew Do's personal downfall, loss of office, career, and reputation, and argued he posed no risk of reoffending. In his allocution, Andrew Do spoke in a choked voice, apologized to his family, the community, and the court, admitted wrongdoing, and said he had witnessed the total destruction of my career, my good name, and my life because of his actions. Even if those words were sincere, they could not erase the harm he caused. After hearing both sides, Judge James Selna remarked, "The defendant's crime is not just theft or fraud, but an attack on the integrity of government." He also noted that Andrew Do pleaded guilty to conspiracy, not direct embezzlement, which somewhat limited restitution liability. Still, considering all factors, the judge agreed with the prosecution and sentenced Do to 5 years in prison, the maximum under the plea agreement. In addition to prison, Andrew Do was ordered to pay restitution of $878,230.80 to the federal government. That figure was based on the court's calculation, about $868,612 received by his family, plus $9,618 in the county's legal costs. Orange County had sought $10.2 million USD, equivalent to the full amount awarded, but the judge denied it as beyond the scope of the offense to which Do pleaded guilty. Under the judgment, Andrew Do must pay $250,000 within 30 days, with the remaining balance paid in installments of $1,000 per month after his release. The sentence was widely viewed as harsh but appropriate, as it fit within the plea's framework. After the hearing, Andrew Do was handcuffed and taken into federal custody, beginning his sentence in August 2025. He waived his right to appeal, making the judgment final. But that was not the full price he would pay. His family also faced severe fallout. His wife, Judge Sherry Pham, was forced to request a leave of absence amid intense public pressure. Andrew Do, daughter Rhiannon Do, was fortunate not to face criminal prosecution and was placed into a diversion program. If she complies fully, her record will be cleared. But even though she avoided prison, Rhiannon still had to sell the home in Tustin, purchased with illegal funds, to repay part of the money to the county. Her legal career was also severely damaged, as her chances of obtaining a professional law license are now close to none. Andrew Do, second daughter, lost her job because of the family scandal. Overall, The Do family, once viewed as prominent, successful, and well-off, was left devastated, with nearly everyone in the household unemployed. As for Than Hung Nguyen, her trial is expected to take place sometime in 2026. After being indicted, Nguyen was released on bail pending trial. She has pleaded not guilty, so her case will proceed to open court litigation. If convicted on all 3 counts, conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering, she could face a maximum of 60 years in prison, 20 years per count, an extremely severe outcome. However, observers believe Nguyen may negotiate a plea deal to reduce her sentence, similar to Andrew Do's case. Her legal team is currently trying to distance her from the role of mastermind and shift more blame onto Peter Pham and Andrew Do. But with clear evidence, signatures, bank accounts, and transfer records, she is still likely to receive a significant prison sentence. As for Peter Pham, as of October 2025, he remains completely untraceable. A trial cannot move forward because the defendant is absent. Still, the 15 charges against him are ready, and if he is captured, he will be jailed immediately without bail as a fugitive. Federal prosecutors insist they will use every available measure to bring him back to the United States to face justice. In theory, the maximum sentence Pham could face runs into the hundreds of years, since the law allows up to 20 years for each fraud and money laundering count, plus 10 years for bribery. Even if sentences could be combined or reduced through a plea, the outlook remains extremely bleak if Peter Pham is arrested. Alongside the criminal proceedings, civil lawsuits have also intensified. Orange County is determined to pursue litigation to recover funds from Vietnamese-American Society and Hand to Hand. In August 2023, when the county filed suit, it froze bank accounts linked to Vietnamese-American Society and Hand to Hand and seized assets purchased with illegal funds, including Rhiannon Do's home. According to Supervisor Janet Nguyen, the county will coordinate with federal prosecutors to recover about $5 million USD from seized accounts and the sale of related assets in order to reimburse the budget. While this figure still falls short of the total loss, it should help ease public outrage to some extent. But the most bitterly ironic part is that legal battles have now erupted even among the defendants themselves. In July 2025, Thu Thao Thivu Aloha financial company filed a lawsuit against Andrew Do and Rhiannon Do, seeking 15 million USD in damages. They accuse Andrew Do of defaming them as bribers in his plea agreement, causing severe reputational and financial harm. Aloha also insists that the $381,000 transferred to Rhiannon was merely a legitimate home purchase loan and claims it was pressured by Vietnamese-American Society and had no idea the money was dirty. Even Peter Pham, despite being a fugitive, has actively filed a lawsuit against Andrew Do through his attorney, seeking 50 million USD in damages. In the complaint, Pham claims the money sent to Andrew Do was not a bribe, but a loan from Vietnamese-American Society's funds that Andrew Do never repaid. Pham also counters that it was Andrew Do who persuaded him to set up Vietnamese-American Society, exploited his limited English and legal knowledge to get him to sign contracts, and then ultimately pinned all the blame on him. The public has grown weary. Legal experts say these lawsuits are unlikely to succeed on the merits and are mainly aimed at gaining leverage in negotiations or muddying public opinion. Either way, this hot potato of blame among the defendants is expected to drag on in the courts. And for that reason, as of now, the case still has not fully ended. Orange County residents are still waiting for the harshest possible sentences for everyone who made their lives even harder during the pandemic. Bogalusa is a small city of roughly 10,000 people in Louisiana. Despite its modest size, the problems related to crime have only grown worse over time. Amid that backdrop, in 2022, Bogalusa residents placed their hopes for change in Tyrin Truong, a 3-year-old graduate of Washington University in Street. Louis, after he pulled off a major upset in the election and became the youngest mayor in the city's history, Truong vowed to revive Bogalusa, reduce crime and corruption, and invest heavily in youth programs and local economic development. However, in less than 2 years, the city was shaken again, this time by news that its young mayor had become embroiled in a major scandal. The first signs of trouble surfaced in early 2024. Despite the mayor's claims that he was increasing police presence on the streets, crime in Bogalusa continued to worsen, with drug trafficking and violent encounters escalating. Unable to sit idle, in April 2024, the Louisiana State Police Narcotics and Violent Crime Task Force launched a large-scale investigation into a drug trafficking organization operating in the Bogalusa area. The investigation was conducted in coordination with the Bogalusa Police Department, the 22nd Judicial District Attorney's Office, and several other state and federal agencies. During surveillance operations, investigators discovered that members of this network were using Facebook and other online platforms to distribute illegal narcotics and receive payments. This method allowed them to expand their operations in sophisticated ways that were difficult to trace. The money generated was then used to purchase firearms and supply the black market. This meant that individuals legally prohibited from owning weapons suddenly had access to guns, which they used in numerous incidents across Bogalusa, further destabilizing the community. These findings alarmed investigators, as they revealed the dangerous intersection between narcotics, trafficking, and rising local violence. While the task force continued its covert probe, unexpected turbulence appeared in the political arena. In April 2024, the Louisiana Legislative Auditor's Office sent a formal warning letter to Mayor Tyrin Truong, stating that the Bogalusa city government had violated public finance laws by failing to submit its 2022 financial report on time. This delay occurred roughly 6 months after Truong took office. As a result, Bogalusa was temporarily stripped of eligibility to receive state and federal funding for infrastructure, public services, and public safety projects. Truong responded by blaming the previous administration for not handing over proper documentation. Nevertheless, the auditor's letter fueled public doubts about the young mayor's administrative competence. More importantly, it marked the beginning of an open confrontation between Truong and the court-appointed fiscal administrator assigned to oversee the city's budget. Specifically, toward the end of 2024, amid Bogalusa's increasingly questionable finances, the Louisiana State Court placed the city under special fiscal supervision and appointed Robert Bob Nielsen as the financial administrator. Nielsen had served as Bogalusa's auditor for nearly 20 years and only stopped when Truong took office due to conflicts between the two. Upon hearing the news, Truong tried to push Nielsen aside, even publicly declaring that he would fire him, though legally, the mayor had no such authority. Furious at having a court-appointed overseer managing the city's finances, Truong accused the move of being a calculated political takeover designed to neutralize an elected leader. The dispute between Truong and the fiscal administrator quickly became a heated local issue, leading to tense hearings and intensifying the turmoil within Bogalusa's political landscape. This chaotic atmosphere set the stage for a scandal that soon intertwined: criminal allegations with issues of public governance. By mid-2024, two parallel undercurrents had formed within Bogalusa's leadership. One was the secret investigation targeting the drug trafficking network, and the other was a crisis of public trust surrounding the city's finances. Few could have predicted that both would eventually converge on one man, Tyrin Truong. Despite once promising to bring transparency and accountability to Bogalusa, the young mayor's rising career became increasingly clouded by suspicion. Rumors began circulating within the community about Truong's bold and at times reckless style of leadership. But only when law enforcement uncovered concrete evidence did the veil of mystery finally begin to lift, signaling a dark chapter for Louisiana's young political star. So, who is Tyrin Truong, and what kind of person was he before becoming entangled in this political storm? Born on the 10th of June 1999 in Mandeville, Louisiana, Tyrin came from a uniquely multicultural background. His grandfather was Vietnamese and immigrated to the United States after the war. His grandmother was African American, giving Tyrin a mixed Vietnamese and African American heritage. His mother, Kathy Truong, is a former U.S. Army soldier, a strong black woman, widely respected in her community. As a child, Tyrin Truong was an exceptional student. He earned a scholarship to Washington University in St. Louis, one of the most prestigious universities in the United States. At Washington University, he double majored in political science and African American studies, while actively participating in student organizations. His leadership potential soon became evident when he was elected student body president, a significant milestone that highlighted his emerging political aptitude. It was during his college years that the idea of becoming Bogalusa's mayor first began to take shape. Still, few believed that a 21-year-old could ever pull off such an ambition. Yet less than 2 years later, he proved it was possible. In 2022, after graduating, Truong turned down career opportunities in larger cities, returned to Bogalusa, and immediately entered the mayoral race. He faced two formidable opponents, incumbent Mayor Wendy Perrette, who had served for 8 years, and a longtime city council member seasoned in local politics. But Tyrin did not back down. He tirelessly knocked on doors, met with residents, and presented his plan for change. His message resonated deeply with Bogalusa's citizens, who were exhausted from years of stagnation. As a result, in the 8th of November 2022 election, Tyrin Truong won decisively with 56% of the vote, far surpassing Mayor Perrette, who received only 19% and securing an outright victory in the first round by exceeding the 50% threshold. At just 23 years old, he became the youngest mayor in Bogalusa's history, and one of the youngest mayors in the entire country at the time. His victory was seen as a refreshing shift, marking the arrival of Gen Z in local politics. The media described it as a stunning political upset, while voters hoped this young Vietnamese-African American leader would inject new energy into a city struggling with long-standing issues. After assuming office in early January 2023, Tyrin Truong immediately immersed himself in work with boundless energy. One of his first actions was appointing a new police chief, hoping to reform the department toward a more community-oriented and responsive public safety model. Truong also launched youth programs at local parks and community centers, hoping to create safe, healthy spaces that would steer young people away from crime. He also proposed initiatives to attract small businesses and redevelop abandoned buildings in downtown Bogalusa, confidently declaring, "This place is just as good as anywhere else." It only fell behind because of weak leadership. But as time passed, Truong's inexperience and lack of political maturity became increasingly apparent. The first issue was the late submission of the city's financial audit report, something mentioned earlier by us. The second came in the form of a lawsuit filed just months after Truong took office, initiated by former Mayor Wendy Perrette. She sued Truong after he refused to provide certain public documents during the transition period. In June 2023, the court ruled in favor of Wendy Perrette, ordering Tyrin Truong to hand over the documents and personally pay 100% of the legal fees and penalties for intentionally violating the FI, state's public records law. The amount ordered by the court was approximately $4,650. Not large, but it was clearly a personal responsibility and therefore could not legally be taken from city funds. This legal defeat marked the first major complication of Truong's term, and unfortunately, he handled it in the worst possible way. According to investigators, Truong pressured an insurance company that provided services to the city to issue a check labeled as reimbursement for the exact amount he owed. He then instructed the finance department to deposit that check into the city's account, and afterward wrote himself a check for the same amount. By doing so, it appeared on paper as though the city had been reimbursed and that Truong merely withdrew funds for a personal expense advance. In reality, he had disguised city funds as reimbursement money to pay off his own debt. Worse still, before carrying out this maneuver, Truong threatened the city council, saying that if they refused to let him use public funds to cover the penalty, he would retaliate by flooding them with continuous public records requests to bury them in paperwork. This conduct was more than enough to constitute threats against public officials and clear abuse of power. And in matters of public safety, Truong soon clashed with the local police force. Bogalusa had its own municipal police department, but chronic lack of funding had long caused the department to be criticized for inefficiency. Initially, the young mayor supported increasing police patrols to deter crime, but by late 2023, faced with severe budget constraints, he suddenly proposed a shocking idea: dissolving the Bogalusa Police Department entirely and transferring all law enforcement responsibilities to the parish sheriff's office. Truong argued that this change would help save money and make better use of parish-level resources. However, the proposal struck a nerve and triggered strong backlash from Bogalusa's police officers. In December 2023, dozens of officers crowded into a city council meeting to protest Truong's plan, openly showing their frustration and fear for their future employment. Images of seasoned officers standing with folded arms in a packed meeting room, facing off against a 24-year-old mayor, quickly became headline news across local media. From that point on, Truong's relationship with the police deteriorated severely. Some observers even began speculating about conspiracy theories, suggesting that this conflict may have prompted law enforcement agencies to pay especially close attention to Truong's questionable actions. Now, let's return to the drug trafficking investigation in Bogalusa. Through technical surveillance, investigators managed to infiltrate the communication channels used by the criminal group. They identified a number of young individuals in Bogalusa involved in the network, including the Pittman brothers, a middle-aged woman named Tanya Stage, and several others. As the structure of the organization became clearer, investigators realized a troubling truth. The network was far larger and more organized than initially believed. According to Washington Parish District Attorney Colin Sims, the organization consisted of up to 20 members operating in a coordinated manner. They were not just selling common drugs like marijuana or MDMA, they were also distributing powerful and highly dangerous prescription painkillers. Because of this, the investigation accelerated with a new determination to root out the criminal organization entirely. And as investigators began tracing the flow of money and relationships among the suspects, they uncovered unusual connections to public officials. Most notably, several individuals on the suspect list appeared to have frequent interactions with city officials, particularly with current mayor Tyrin Truong. At first, no one knew what to make of it. Was Truong merely acquainted with someone in the group by coincidence, or was he actively involved in illegal dealings? But soon, objective evidence began to surface showing that Truong had engaged in transactions involving proceeds from narcotics offenses, a violation of Louisiana Revised Statute 40-1041, which prohibits dealings with illegally obtained funds. In simpler terms, Truong was suspected of receiving or managing profits from drug sales, possibly for money laundering or for sharing proceeds with members of the trafficking network. Additionally, digital evidence indicated that Truong had previously purchased illegal substances from individuals named in the investigation. The idea of a sitting mayor personally purchasing narcotics was already shocking, but law enforcement believed Truong was not only a customer, he was also providing protection for the drug network through the power of his office, a clear abuse of authority. Parallel to this line of investigation, police uncovered something else also linked to the name Tyrin Truong. In August 2024, Truong led the Bogalusa delegation to a national mayor's conference held in Atlanta, Georgia. The conference itself was legitimate, but what Truong did on the sidelines was far more concerning. Investigators obtained information indicating that during this trip, the young mayor used city funds to rent a luxury Airbnb apartment where he hosted a wild party that included the presence of a high-end escort hired exclusively for himself. This was enough for Truong to be accused of facilitating prostitution and embezzling public funds for personal use. Supporting evidence included the Airbnb invoice paid with the city's credit card and text messages arranging the meeting with the escort messages recovered from Truong's phone. By this point, the investigation had expanded from narcotics offenses to prostitution-related misconduct and public corruption, all revolving around a single individual, Tyrin Truong. These developments placed the task force in a difficult position, as the central figure in their criminal investigation was now the head of the city government. However, Louisiana Attorney General Liz Murrill emphasized a firm stance. Zero tolerance for wrongdoing, especially among public officials, and instructed all agencies to coordinate closely and gather airtight evidence before moving forward. To ensure confidentiality, the investigation into Truong was kept completely secret with no leaks to avoid alerting the forest before the strike. As a result, during the entire covert probe, Tyrin Truong remained unaware and continued presenting himself calmly before the public. On the 3rd of January 2025, just days before everything unraveled, Truong even delivered Bogalusa's State of the City address, highlighting his administration's achievements over the past year and reflecting on how he was still learning valuable life lessons at his age. He said, with notable emphasis, "Making mistakes is inevitable, and we have made mistakes. But I was always taught that when you stumble, you get up, dust yourself off, and learn from it." Few could have predicted that only 4 days after that inspirational remark, law enforcement would get up to act and Truong would stumble straight into the criminal justice system in the literal sense. And then the day arrived. Early in the morning of the 7th of January 2025, a large contingent of law enforcement officers stormed and surrounded the home of Mayor Tyrin Truong. Curious neighbors, awakened by the commotion, witnessed an unprecedented sight. The city's top elected official walking out of his house in handcuffs, escorted to a police vehicle as stunned residents looked on. But Truong was not the only one caught in the sweep. At the same time, Louisiana State Police and partner agencies arrested 6 additional suspects across Bogalusa, individuals already identified earlier in the drug investigation. They were Mackenzie Lynn Cefalu, Day Salim Wally Pittman, D. Rule S. Pittman, 22, Salahal Dien Malike Pittman, 26, Tanya Renee Stage, 51, and Devin Michael Williams, 28. All were taken into custody and booked at the Washington Parish Jail. In the days that followed, further arrests continued as authorities worked to dismantle the entire organization. At Mayor Truong's residence, police executed a search warrant immediately after taking him into custody. There, investigators seized several critical pieces of evidence, including electronic devices containing transaction records, a significant amount of cash suspected to be tied to drug activity, and multiple small bags containing white powder and pills found throughout the home. Officials confirmed that these substances included opioid-based painkillers, high-grade marijuana, concentrated THC products, and MDMA. Police also confiscated various documents and invoices related to city spending as part of the embezzlement probe. Meanwhile, searches conducted at the homes of other suspects yielded additional key evidence. At the Pittman and Cefalu residences, officers seized an arsenal of weapons, handguns, rifles, and ammunition. Many of these firearms were identified as illegal or previously used in violent incidents in Bogalusa. The stockpile of weapons and narcotics painted a clear picture of how large-scale the criminal operation truly was. Immediately after Truong's arrest, the Louisiana State Police issued a press release detailing the charges he was facing. According to the announcement, Truong was preliminarily charged with 3 criminal offenses. 1, transactions involving proceeds from drug offenses, and 2, unauthorized use of public property, and 3, procurement of prostitution. While held at the Washington Parish Jail, Truong's attorney arranged for him to post bond. The court set bail at $150,000, a substantial sum, but unsurprising for an official who previously oversaw a city budget worth millions. By the evening of the 7th of January 2025, Tyrin Truong walked out of the detention facility after his family paid the bond. Outside, a small group of relatives and supporters clapped and welcomed him, despite the media storm surrounding the case. Truong's mother, Kathy, tearfully insisted that the accusations against her son were nonsense and politically motivated. Meanwhile, inside Bogalusa City Hall, confusion and anxiety spread. The City Council convened an emergency meeting during which District Attorney Colin Sims addressed officials and residents to explain the situation. Attorney General Liz Murrill also released a public statement reaffirming that misconduct by public officials would not be tolerated and applauding the cooperative effort that brought the case to light. As for the Bogalusa city government, since no conviction had been issued, Truong technically remained mayor. Just days after being released on bond, he boldly returned to City Hall and resumed daily duties despite numerous calls for him to step down. This sparked a sharp divide in public opinion. Supporters argued that Truong is innocent until proven guilty, while opponents feared he might use his position to tamper with evidence or intimidate subordinates. In response, the City Council announced that special oversight measures would remain in place, and Financial Administrator Robert Nielsen would continue to control city expenditures, ensuring Truong could not independently access municipal funds. Nielsen bluntly stated that he and the mayor could not have a functional working relationship, but emphasized that his priority was preventing Bogalusa from going bankrupt, regardless of Truong's preferences. Amid the chaos, Tyrin Truong continued to insist on his innocence. On the 9th of January 2025, he appeared before the press at City Hall declaring that all allegations are misunderstandings and untrue, and that he would not resign because he still had important work to do for Bogalusa. But these reassurances did little to calm the public. For many residents, the shock and sense of betrayal were overwhelming. They had once hoped Truong would bring positive change, yet now their city was making national headlines because of a scandal of unprecedented magnitude. From being celebrated as the youngest Vietnamese-African-American mayor, Truong had become a symbol of controversy and disgrace in the eyes of the public. But even though the situation was already shocking enough, the allegations did not stop there. Auditors discovered that Tyrin Truong had unilaterally taken salary payments and allowances beyond what had been approved, such as unauthorized vacation payouts not listed in his contract, and had also issued advance payments without city council approval. These actions constitute embezzlement of public funds, essentially, the misappropriation of government property. Another allegation claimed that Truong pressured a city contractor to make a payment to a third party that had not performed any work. In other words, he created or colluded with a shell company to receive money for doing nothing, then used his mayoral authority to force the primary contractor to transfer the funds. This was an extremely sophisticated form of public fund embezzlement. If proven true, it would show just how brazenly the youngest mayor in Bogalusa's history abused his power. According to the grand jury, Truong was also accused of hinting at demands for kickbacks from a business that had planned to invest in a major project in Bogalusa. This behavior could be interpreted as bribery or extortion. As a result, the company withdrew, costing the city a promising development opportunity. This may be one of the most damaging actions to the community, because due to the leader's greed, Bogalusa lost a major investment that could have created new jobs for local residents. The indictment also noted that Truong ordered public employees, a team of city plumbers, to perform repair work at his mother's house using city-owned materials for the job. In other words, he used public manpower and public supplies for his family's personal benefit. This conduct is not only unethical, but could also constitute theft or misuse of public assets, since government property was consumed for a private purpose. However, for now, all of these remain allegations, and Tyrin Truong continues to deny every charge. His defense attorney has dismissed the accusations as baseless and expressed complete confidence that Truong will prevail when the case goes to trial. On the night of the 10th of March 2017, a light drizzle fell over Washington, D.C., and darkness blanketed the area surrounding the White House. Near midnight, at around 11:38 p.m., security sensors suddenly triggered an alert. An intruder had breached the South Lawn perimeter. The individual had climbed over a 1.5-meter fence near the Treasury building on East Executive Avenue, right next to the White House, to slip into the outer perimeter. Not stopping there, he scaled a 2.5-meter vehicle gate, then crossed another lower fence at the southeast corner, moving deeper into the grounds step by step. Alarms had already sounded multiple times, yet somehow the intruder managed to evade the Secret Service agents rushing out to search in the darkness. He hid among trees and shadows, advancing boldly but cautiously. Security cameras captured him darting from the east side toward the White House's front facade. At one point, he even pressed himself against a window, shielding his face with his hand as he peeked inside. Even more brazenly, he tested the handle of a door leading into the East Wing to see if it was unlocked. All of this unfolded in complete silence. Despite the alarms blaring, the mysterious man wandered calmly past 3 guard posts without being detected. He even sat down to retie his shoelaces on the White House lawn, a moment of eerie confidence, suggesting he knew he had not yet been spotted. For nearly 17 minutes, he roamed freely inside what should have been the most secure property in the United States. It wasn't until he approached the entrance of the South Portico, the main doorway to the president's residence, that Secret Service officer Wayne Azevedo spotted a shadowy figure hiding behind a column. The officer immediately drew his firearm and shouted, "What are you doing here?" Instead of running, the intruder calmly replied, "I'm a friend of the president. I have an appointment with him," an answer that stunned the White House security team. The officer pressed further. "How did you get in here?" The man continued in the same calm tone. "I jumped the fence." Additional agents quickly arrived to assist and subdued the intruder. He was arrested at 11:38 p.m. on the South Lawn, just tens of meters from the president's residence. At the scene, agents immediately searched him and the backpack he carried. Inside were several concerning items: 2 cans of pepper spray, 1 in his jacket and 1 in his bag, a valid U.S. passport, an Apple laptop, a copy of Trump, The Art of the Deal, and most notably, a handwritten letter addressed to President Trump. Realizing the intruder had pepper spray, an object that could be used as a weapon along with his unusual behavior, agents immediately locked down the area and alerted the president's protective detail. Fortunately, President Trump was completely safe inside the residence, and there was no indication the intruder had entered the building. A full sweep of both the south and north lawns confirmed there were no accomplices or additional threats. The intruder was quickly identified as Jonathan Tuan Tran, 26, a resident of Milpitas, California. The fact that a young Vietnamese-American had traveled from the West Coast all the way to Washington to breach the White House grounds shocked the public. The next morning, the 11th of March 2017, Jonathan Tran was charged with entering restricted grounds while carrying a dangerous weapon, a federal offense carrying a maximum penalty of up to 10 years in prison. He was held in Washington, D.C. that weekend after the court ruled he posed both a flight risk and a potential danger if released. Investigators also discovered that Jonathan Tran had been loitering around Pennsylvania Avenue, where the White House is located, for nearly 6 hours before the breach. At the time of his intrusion, President Trump was inside the White House, unharmed and unaffected. In a brief statement to the press, President Trump described the intruder as a troubled person and very sad. He also commended the Secret Service, saying they had done a fantastic job apprehending the suspect. Jonathan Tuan Tran was born in 1990 to a Vietnamese-American family in California. He grew up in Milpitas, a small city in Silicon Valley near San Jose. Tran was intelligent and earned a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from San Jose State University. Despite his strong academic background, by early 2017, Tran's life had become increasingly unstable. He was unemployed and had moved back in with his family. People who knew him in Milpitas described him as gentle, introverted, and quiet. Seeing him suddenly appear on national news as the White House intruder was a complete shock to everyone. His distinctly Vietnamese middle name, Tuan An, quickly drew attention within the Vietnamese-American community. But in reality, Jonathan Tran had no criminal history and had never attracted negative attention prior to this incident. According to investigative records, he had no prior convictions and had never been on the Secret Service's radar. Signs of unusual behavior only began to surface a few months before the intrusion. Family and friends noticed that Tran had become paranoid and increasingly obsessed with political conspiracy theories. In particular, he was deeply fixated on President Donald Trump and the controversies surrounding the 2016 election. He spent extensive time following news about the alleged Russian election interference and the post-election Trump-Russia dossier claims. Prosecutors later stated that Tran became so consumed by these ideas that he was unable to control himself unless detained, believing he had a mission to help the president untangle the mess of the Russia files. This explains why he traveled to Washington, D.C., carrying one of Trump's books. In the handwritten letter addressed to the president, found inside his backpack, Tran claimed to have important information about Russian hackers. He also wrote that he believed he was being watched, that his phone and emails were being monitored, and that he had previously been called schizophrenic. After the incident, Tran's younger brother told CNN that a Secret Service agent had called their family to inform them about Jonathan climbing the White House fence. The news caused great distress for their mother. The family confirmed that Jonathan had shown signs of mental instability prior to the incident. In July 2017, during psychiatric evaluation, specialists diagnosed Jonathan Tran with schizoaffective disorder with depressive features, a severe mental illness that can cause delusions, paranoia, and unpredictable behavior if not properly treated. Thus, the portrait of Jonathan Tran is one of stark contrasts. An educated young man with no criminal record, raised in a hardworking immigrant family, yet at the same time, someone mentally unstable, consumed by conspiracy theories, and willing to take reckless action based on his delusions. The intersection of his deteriorating mental health and the politically chaotic climate of 2017 ultimately turned Tran into the central figure of this extraordinary White House intrusion case. Immediately after his arrest, contrary to the image of a violent or aggressive intruder, Jonathan Tran fully cooperated with authorities and explained his intentions. At the scene, he insisted to Secret Service agents that he was a friend of the president and had an appointment with President Trump to share information. This claim was quickly dismissed as impossible, yet Tran remained calm and showed no signs of agitation. During questioning, he repeatedly mentioned Russian hackers and fake news, saying he possessed important information he needed to warn the president about. These statements aligned with the handwritten letter he carried, a multi-page note in which Tran claimed he was being followed or harassed by Russian hackers or some unknown force while expressing his desire to help the president fight against fabricated stories in the media. Tran stated that he never intended to harm anyone and did not carry lethal weapons, claiming the pepper spray was solely for self-defense. His only goal, he said, was to approach the president to report the situation, a mission he genuinely believed in, even though no one else took it seriously. At his preliminary hearing on the 13th of March 2017, his attorney requested conditional release. The judge agreed, allowing Tran to return to his parents' home in California while awaiting trial on the condition that he wear a GPS tracking bracelet and undergo regular mental health evaluations. Jonathan Tran quietly left Washington. But the case was far from over. Investigators now faced the biggest question of all. What truly motivated such a bold and unprecedented breach of the White House? Shortly after being released on bail in March 2017, Tran revealed more about the mission he believed he was carrying out. In a social media post, he wrote that he went to the White House because he wanted to meet the president in the light of day to clear up the messy Russia file. Prosecutors later used this post as evidence, arguing that Tran showed no remorse after the incident and, instead, viewed his actions as justified and righteous. However, Tran's attorney and federal prosecutors attempted to negotiate a resolution to avoid a lengthy trial. Jonathan Tran ultimately decided to plead guilty in hopes of receiving leniency. On the 13th of July 2017, at the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, he pleaded guilty to a single felony count of entering and remaining in a restricted area. In exchange, prosecutors agreed to drop the allegation of carrying a dangerous weapon, as pepper spray is not considered a lethal weapon, and recommended a sentence below the statutory maximum. Both sides jointly proposed that the court impose probation with special conditions instead of imprisonment. While awaiting sentencing, Tran complied fully with all court requirements, including undergoing a threat assessment interview with the Secret Service and continuing mental health treatment. These efforts were intended to demonstrate that he no longer posed any security risk. After several months of psychological treatment, Jonathan Tran gradually became aware of the seriousness of his actions. During the sentencing hearing in late September 2017, he addressed the court briefly, expressing remorse. "I deeply regret what I did. It was clearly wrong. My mind was in a very different place at the time." He emphasized that he never intended to inspire others, nor to cause actual harm to anyone. Tran's final statement reflected genuine remorse and a clearer understanding that his behavior stemmed from mental instability rather than malicious intent. This sincerity had a positive influence on how the court evaluated his sentence. The sentencing hearing took place on the 25th of September 2017 in Washington, D.C., presided over by U.S. District Judge James E. Boasberg. In court, prosecutors emphasized that Tran's case was not a victimless crime, noting that his actions triggered multiple security alerts and diverted federal resources away from other critical duties. For that reason, the prosecution requested 6 months of imprisonment as a deterrent, arguing that White House fence-jumping incidents had increased significantly in 2017, each one consuming substantial federal and local resources. Prosecutor David Mudd further stressed Tran's unusual obsession with President Trump, expressing concern that such fixation might be too strong to control without detention, potentially making Tran an ongoing threat. Mudd also submitted evidence showing that after his arrest, Tran posted online that he wanted to meet the president to clear up the fabricated dossier, a sign that Tran remained firmly attached to his delusions. In contrast, defense attorney Tony Miles argued that Jonathan Tran acted during an uncontrollable mental health crisis rather than out of malicious criminal intent. He emphasized that mental illness combined with unemployment and personal distress pushed a first-time offender into a misguided, impulsive act. The defense also noted that Tran had responded well to treatment and adhered strictly to all pretrial conditions, demonstrating that he could be safely supervised in the community without incarceration. After deliberation, Judge Boasberg acknowledged that Tran's actions were extremely serious, created risk for the president, and forced multiple agencies into full alert. He described the act as a serious offense requiring serious consideration. However, he also agreed that Tran's mental health condition represented a significant mitigating factor. As a result, the court sentenced Jonathan Tuan Tran to 2 years of probation instead of prison time. Tran would not serve additional jail time beyond the 3 days he spent in custody after arrest, but would be required to comply with strict conditions: continued mental health treatment and counseling, full cooperation with the Secret Service for periodic threat assessments, and a complete ban from entering the White House area, central Washington, D.C., or any hotel or property owned by Donald Trump worldwide during the probation period. The judge warned that violating any condition could result in immediate incarceration. The sentence reflected a balance between national security concerns and recognition of the defendant's psychiatric condition. Jonathan Tran left the courthouse as a conditionally free man, returning to California to rebuild his life under court supervision. Just when it seemed the case had finally ended, less than a year later, Jonathan Tran once again drew attention for violating the terms of his probation. In July 2018, still within his 2-year probation period, Tran unexpectedly appeared at Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., a direct violation of the court order prohibiting him from entering the D.C. area without permission. Not only that, he attempted to slip into the office of Congressman Devin Nunes, chairman of the House Intelligence Committee and an ally of President Trump, again insisting he needed to present his ideas about the Russia dossier. Tran told Capitol Police that he knew his return to Washington violated court orders, but he had a burning desire to testify before Congress about the Russia-related conspiracy theories he believed in. This time, Capitol Police arrested Tran on the 6th of July 2018 without any chase because he had essentially shown up voluntarily and asked to meet the congressman. During the search, officers found a small knife, a handwritten checklist, and several books, including the same copy of Trump, The Art of the Deal he had carried during his White House intrusion the year before. Carrying a knife meant Tran had also violated the prohibition against possessing weapons while on probation. In court, he admitted violating the terms, but explained that he had no choice because he wanted to testify before Congress to protect the president from fake news. This time, the judge had run out of patience. Instead of simply revoking his probation, the court imposed an additional 15 days of imprisonment as a stern warning. Tran served 2 weeks in jail and was released, continuing the remainder of his probation under supervision until the end of 2019. The case of Jonathan Tuan Tran ultimately closed with the image of a Vietnamese-American young man driven by inexplicable political delusions, transforming from someone with no criminal history into the White House intruder, simply because he wanted to deliver a message to the president. In the end, Tran did not face long-term imprisonment. He received probation combined with psychiatric treatment, a somewhat compassionate outcome, balancing public safety with the need to support someone suffering from mental illness. After his 2018 violation, Tran appeared to withdraw from public view, likely focusing on treatment and staying away from politics as ordered by the court. To this day, no further violations involving Tran have been reported, suggesting he completed his probation and returned to a normal life. For federal authorities, the 2017 intrusion became a significant wake-up call for the United States Secret Service. The White House in Washington, D.C. is one of the most heavily secured places in the United States, surrounded by more than 2-meter-high steel fencing, dense sensor systems, layers of surveillance cameras, and a 24/7 Secret Service patrol force. Yet, even with such tight security, several scandals occurred around that period. A notable example was in September 2014, when an Army veteran named Omar Gonzalez jumped the north fence and sprinted straight into the East Room with a knife in his pocket before being stopped, an incident that forced the Secret Service director at the time to resign immediately. After this serious incident, the White House installed metal spikes on top of the perimeter fence in 2015 and planned to raise the fence height to prevent future intrusions. Ironically, just 2 months after President Donald Trump took office in January 2017, history repeated itself when an intruder breached the White House grounds on the night of March 10, 2017, marking the first unlawful intrusion of the Trump administration. The breach occurred at a time when the United States was already tense over the 2016 Russian election interference controversy and the political turmoil of the new administration, sending shockwaves across the country. Then, House Oversight Committee Chairman Jason Chaffetz demanded an immediate report from the Secret Service, calling the incident an absolute embarrassment, as the intruder had wandered undetected for far too long and gotten far too close to the White House. Clearly, the event raised serious questions about the Secret Service's ability to protect the 18-acre White House complex, an area expected to be impenetrably secure. That context amplified the shock of the Jonathan Tran case, a young man whose actions forced America's entire security apparatus into high alert. Following the incident, the U.S. Secret Service tightened its procedures and accelerated plans to reinforce the White House fence. Congress increased oversight as well, requiring the agency to provide regular progress reports on security improvements. The most notable project was the plan to upgrade the White House fence to approximately 4 meters in height. Beginning in July 2019, workers dismantled the old 2-meter fence and began building a new one nearly twice as tall, made of reinforced steel and equipped with advanced anti-climb and anti-intrusion technology. By 2021, the new, nearly impenetrable fence surrounding the White House was completed, significantly reducing similar intrusion attempts. Even so, the lesson from the Jonathan Tran incident remains. A gap in security, combined with the instability of a single individual, can lead to unpredictable and potentially dangerous situations. Fortunately, this story ended without casualties. Instead, it concluded with strict enforcement of the law and major improvements to national security. Still, the 2017 White House intrusion by Jonathan Tuan on Tran will be remembered as an extraordinary case where reality and delusion crossed paths, and as a reminder that behind every criminal file is a human being with unique circumstances. What about you? What do you think of this one-of-a-kind case in American history? In late 2021, the United States Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, received alerts about a series of unusual transactions. The report showed thousands of small payments that, combined, totaled millions of USD, flowing into several business accounts under the name of an international media company. Many of those transactions originated from prepaid debit cards issued to state unemployment benefit recipients. Around the same time, the Department of Labor Office of Inspector General, DOL-OIG, also began receiving complaints from states that unemployment benefits were being drained through prepaid card networks. Many Americans had lost their jobs during the pandemic and were desperately relying on unemployment assistance to survive the crisis. But when they applied for benefits, they were rejected because their identities appeared to have been used already. For example, a woman in California discovered that someone else had collected her unemployment benefits. A veteran in Texas received a benefits card in the mail even though he had never applied. In other words, these law-abiding citizens suddenly lost their rightful support despite doing nothing wrong. After receiving the alerts, a federal investigative task force was formed to follow the earliest leads. By piecing together the data, investigators traced the money to a bank account in New York belonging to a multinational media company called the Epoch Times, an account that had received an enormous, mysterious influx, totaling 67 million USD. Authorities quickly hypothesized that this could be a money laundering signal tied to highly sophisticated COVID-19 relief fraud. On the surface, everything looked clean. Money was deposited into a legitimate corporate account, but its origin was extremely murky. The task force began collecting bank data, transaction statements, account holder information, and transfer histories. The overall picture gradually came into focus. That account was receiving money from countless prepaid cards, each card tied to an unemployment benefit recipient somewhere in the United States during the COVID-19 period, at roughly $600 per week. That money was then routed through multiple intermediary accounts. A large portion was also quickly converted into cryptocurrency and moved through crypto wallets. After recording and organizing the electronic data, investigators identified several red flags. First was a repeated transaction pattern, using unemployment benefit cards to purchase cryptocurrency. Next, identity data also appeared to have been stolen. Investigators found that many bank accounts and crypto wallets were opened under the names of United States citizens who had no connection to the case at all. This indicated that their personal information had been exploited to create fraudulent accounts. And although the money moved through a complex maze, in the end, a very large portion still landed in the official accounts of the Epoch Times and several affiliated companies. That effectively turned the company into a money laundering machine for a huge volume of illegal funds, even though on paper it was reported as legitimate revenue. The question now was, did the company's leadership know about this, or were they themselves the masterminds and accomplices? To quickly unravel a case this sophisticated, the task force brought in support from multiple agencies, including representatives from the Department of Labor, Office of Inspector General, the Diplomatic Security Service, DSS, and the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. The team's initial assessment was that this was an organized money laundering operation, with the potential to expand across borders. From the earliest stages of data collection, investigators learned that illegal funds were being washed through multiple layers of accounts in cryptocurrency before being legalized as the revenue of a legitimate company. Therefore, they hypothesized that there was an insider or a mastermind inside the company planted to facilitate the laundering, because no outsider could so easily run transactions of that scale through corporate accounts without raising suspicion. But to prove it, the team had to spend months throughout 2022 gathering and analyzing evidence. They scrutinized hundreds of thousands of transaction lines from related accounts. The results revealed a network of more than 30,000 repeated transactions, an overwhelming number that demonstrated the staggering scale of the scheme. Next, using blockchain tracking tools, agents traced related Bitcoin and Ethereum wallets. They discovered that a cryptocurrency exchange was being used as a consolidation hub. There, the masterminds converted funds from unemployment cards into Bitcoin at a rate of 70 to 80 cents per $1 in cash. Then the cryptocurrency was forwarded to wallets controlled by an individual or a group. By mid-2023, with enough preliminary evidence, a court authorized the investigators to secretly search the email servers and cloud-stored data of that mysterious New York-based media company. Technical specialists quickly recovered numerous internal emails and messages referencing a group called the Make Money Online team, abbreviated as MMO, an internal unit responsible for online business operations, along with keywords such as crypto, prepaid cards, and unlocked bank account. Most notably, an email from the year 2021 sent by the company's chief financial officer, Wydong Bill Guan, to an employee using the alias Hung stated, "Make sure at least 5 million USD is transferred into the company account this week. If the bank asks, say it's because the Make Money Online campaign has surged in subscribers." This cold, matter-of-fact email almost completely exposed the roles of the two key figures in the suspected scheme. It was clear that everything was directed by Chief Financial Officer Guan, with a person named Hung carrying out the orders. At the same time, during the investigation, authorities were fortunate to receive unexpected cooperation from an insider witness. A former member of the Make Money Online team secretly contacted law enforcement. Fearing involvement in criminal activity, this person requested to become a cooperating witness and provided confidential information. According to the witness's testimony, investigators learned that the MMO team received thousands of sets of personal identity data purchased from the black market, then used them to open bank accounts and crypto wallets to collect fraudulent funds. That was not all. In late 2023, a second witness emerged, a low-level accomplice arrested in one state for unemployment card fraud. This individual confessed that he was part of a network specializing in collecting unemployment benefit cards and reselling them for cryptocurrency to a foreign partner. The credibility of his testimony was high because all details matched independent electronic evidence. He also described the transaction method. The buyer, usually a foreign partner, paid him about 70 cents in cryptocurrency for every $1 on the card. He would then provide the card number and PIN so the other party could withdraw the money. This testimony unlocked a crucial point, confirming the existence of an overseas mastermind coordinating the purchase of fraudulent funds using cryptocurrency. Although the only identifier the witness remembered was an online alias, the crypto wallet account used by the buyer had already been on investigators' radar. That account matched the information they had regarding the person named Hung mentioned in the chief financial officer's emails. So who exactly was this person, and where was he? Through diplomatic channels between the United States Department of Justice and authorities in South Korea and Vietnam, investigators traced the identity to Le Van Hung, a Vietnamese employee working at the Epoch Times' Asia office. Travel records showed that Hung had left Vietnam for South Korea in mid-2024. Based on location data, Hung's mobile phone was found to be active in Seoul. Immediately, the United States Diplomatic Security Service coordinated with South Korean police to place Hung under discreet surveillance. In parallel, through mutual legal assistance agreements, the United States obtained Hung's chat and email history. Among them were messages in which Hung instructed another person to call a bank while impersonating the account holder in order to unlock a frozen bank account. This was a key piece of evidence showing Hung's active participation in the conspiracy. Thanks to these meticulous investigative steps, by the end of 2023, prosecutors had sufficient grounds to identify the suspects. They were Wai Dong, Bill Guan, Chief Financial Officer of the Epoch Times, and Le Van Hung, the employee in charge of the MMO team at the overseas office. From there, detailed profiles of the two individuals were established. Wai Dong, Bill Guan, 61 years old, had served as Chief Financial Officer of the Epoch Times since before 2020. He moved to the United States in the 1990s, holds a Master of Business Administration degree, and previously worked for several Chinese-American nonprofit organizations. A practitioner of Falun Gong, Guan joined the Epoch Times, a newspaper founded by that community, and rose to the position of Chief Financial Officer due to the trust placed in his abilities. In his personal life, Guan lived with his wife in New Jersey, appeared intellectual, and had no prior criminal record. However, signs of abnormal conduct linked to criminal activity had begun to surface in recent years. During the period from 2019 to 2020, Epoch Times revenue surged dramatically. Guan explained internally that this was due to a new business strategy. He even lied to banks when questioned about the sudden influx of funds, claiming that the money came from donations. The other suspect was Le Van Hung, 29 years old, a Vietnamese national who played a key accomplice role. Hung graduated from university in Vietnam with a major in information technology, worked as a freelance online worker, and then joined the Epoch Times around the period from 2019 to 2020. He was recruited into the Make Money Online group, a special unit of the Epoch Times based overseas, whose official mission was to develop online business operations. Young, single, fluent in English, and highly tech-savvy, Hung quickly became Guan's effective right-hand man in online dealings. Guan trusted Hung enough to place him in charge of the MMO team, showing that he had organizational ability and understood how digital financial systems operate. Inside the company, Hung kept a low profile, and few people knew what he actually did because the MMO team operated separately and overseas. Hung's family background in Vietnam was also unremarkable. His parents ran a small business. He had no criminal record in Vietnam, but investigators suspected he had participated in hacker forums and online data black markets. That experience was likely what enabled Hung to gather or purchase United States citizens' personal information for opening fraudulent accounts. The case files on the two suspects and their alleged crimes were quickly finalized and presented to a federal grand jury in late May 2024. At that point, what needed to be done urgently was arrest and prosecution. Early Sunday morning on June 2, 2024, FBI agents and Diplomatic Security Service personnel suddenly raided the home of Wai Dong Bill Guan in Secaucus, New Jersey. Guan was handcuffed before he could mount any real resistance. In a quick search, agents seized his phone, computers, and banking documents from the residence. That same day, Guan was transported to federal court in Manhattan to appear before a magistrate judge. He was charged with conspiracy to commit money laundering and bank fraud. Because the alleged motive involved personal gain and advancing his own political agenda, he faced a maximum sentence of 20 years for money laundering and 30 years for each bank fraud count. However, Guan pleaded not guilty at the initial arraignment, and the court set bail at $3 million USD for his release pending trial. As for Le Van Hung, surveillance indicated that he was in South Korea. Therefore, the United States Department of Justice and South Korea's Ministry of Justice coordinated to track him down in Seoul in early November 2024. They caught Hung while he was hiding in a serviced apartment. When handcuffed, Le Van Hung appeared shocked but did not resist. During the search of his residence, authorities seized an encrypted laptop containing cryptocurrency wallets and a list of thousands of United States citizens' personal information. After about 10 days to complete procedures, Hung was extradited to the United States on November 15, 2024, and appeared in court the next day. There, he was ordered detained without bail due to a high flight risk. But like Guan, Hung denied all allegations at his initial arraignment. However, based on witness statements and multiple leads, investigators successfully reconstructed the full picture of this shocking money laundering scheme. In the year 2019, the Epoch Times wanted to expand its influence but faced financial difficulties. Weidong Bill Guan, as chief financial officer, constantly struggled to find new revenue sources. In the end, he came up with a dark, money-making solution. Guan created a special group called Make Money Online, recruiting several young, highly skilled IT workers at the Asia office, including Lê Văn Hung. On the surface, the MMO team was tasked with boosting online revenue. But Guan's real purpose in creating this group was to build a lab for unconventional money-making, more flexible and less likely to be noticed by headquarters. Early 2020 was when the COVID-19 pandemic erupted, the economic crisis spread, and the United States government quickly approved generous unemployment relief programs. A golden opportunity appeared in the eyes of Guan and Hung. From New York, Guan heard about unemployment benefit fraud schemes and quickly realized the stolen funds were enormous and that the criminals behind them needed a way to wash that money safely. At the Asia office, Hung was also monitoring underground forums and found numerous offers for benefit debit cards loaded with money. A criminal idea took shape. Why not have the Epoch Times buy this dirty money at a discount, then record it as clean revenue for the company? Guan secretly communicated with Hung through encrypted channels, and the two agreed to launch the plan. In mid-2020, Hung began building the infrastructure for the operation. He created dozens of anonymous cryptocurrency wallets, set up shell companies, and collected lists of leaked personal information from the dark web. Hung also trained several trusted MMO team members on how to open online bank accounts using stolen identities and how to conduct crypto transactions. On his end, Guan opened additional corporate bank accounts for the Epoch Times and its related companies, spread across multiple banks. He also proactively contacted a small overseas cryptocurrency exchange and secretly negotiated arrangements to buy Bitcoin using USD wire transfers. From late 2020 to early 2021, preparations were completed and the plan was officially launched. Hung reached out to unemployment benefit fraud criminals and offered a deal. He would buy the funds loaded on prepaid unemployment cards for about 70% of their face value. To keep transactions safe, Hung required sellers to send him the card data. In return, he would transfer the corresponding Bitcoin to their wallets. Everything was done online, under anonymity. Hung and his group then withdrew money from those cards or transferred funds from the cards into bank accounts they controlled. After the money reached intermediary accounts, Hung moved it back and forth across multiple accounts to erase traces of its origin. At the same time, part of the money was converted into Bitcoin and then sold back into USD, which was deposited into company accounts designed to conceal any direct link to the stolen unemployment benefit card funds. Throughout the year 2021, the plan ran smoothly and expanded rapidly. The number of cards Hung purchased grew from a few hundred to tens of thousands. Dirty money poured into the company at such a volume that the Epoch Times' records showed revenue in 2021, rising by 410% compared with 2020. Company leadership celebrated these dream results. As chief financial officer, Guan explained internally that the surge was due to an effective online promotion campaign that drove supporter subscriptions sharply upward, along with increased reader donations. This vague explanation was easily accepted amid the company's apparent upward momentum. No one realized that the money was actually stolen from the government and from countless unemployed people. From time to time, external banks raised questions when the Epoch Times' corporate accounts suddenly showed thousands of small transactions that added up to tens of millions of USD. Yet Guan calmly lied, claiming it was all donor support from readers. Without concrete proof, the banks had little choice but to accept the explanation, while remaining highly cautious. That suspicion led to a quiet internal inquiry by the banks. Eventually, they reported the activity to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, in late 2021, and the Epoch Times was officially placed under scrutiny. In the year 2022, Guan and Hung continued running their laundering pipeline, but the danger was growing. The amount they had laundered had exceeded 50 million USD. The Epoch Times also began drawing media attention because of its abnormal growth. In October 2022, an NBC News article revealed that the newspaper's revenue had surged by as much as 685% over 2 years and raised a major question about the true source of that income. Guan broke into a sweat and tried to calm the situation by writing to a congressional office, claiming that donations actually made up only a small portion of revenue, implicitly suggesting that the rest came from legitimate newspaper sales and advertising. Overseas, Hung grew worried that buying benefit cards was becoming more difficult as the United States government tightened controls. He quickly shifted to purchasing dirty money from other sources, such as bank fraud and other forms of identity theft, to keep the cash flow going. Even so, by the end of 2022, they had reached their goal. 67 million USD had been successfully pumped into the company. In early 2023, headwinds began to hit. Federal investigators had gathered enough suspicion to quietly move into a covert investigative phase. Guan and Hung had no idea and continued communicating frequently through encrypted channels. Still, Hung could sense that the unemployment fraud front was being exposed. He reduced transactions and deleted a large amount of sensitive data on his computer. Guan also became more cautious, limiting any mention of the MMO team in meetings. They realized they could not keep it going forever, so they planned to wash the last few million and then stop. But they did not know that everything they did had been under scrutiny for a long time, and that the power of the law would arrive one step faster. Justice came knocking, one by one, in the second half of 2024, bringing the criminal run of the Asian duo to a close. As of now, the major money laundering case involving Weidong Guan and Lei Van Hung is still in litigation and has not reached a final verdict. Given the complexity and high-tech nature of the case, the defendants' not guilty pleas mean that both prosecutors and defense counsel must prepare thoroughly for court battles that are likely to be lengthy. From the final months of 2024 into 2025, the parties have been engaged in evidence discovery. The prosecution team, Assistant United States Attorneys Jane Kim, Emily Deininger, and Rebecca Dell, has submitted a large volume of materials, including bank statements, computer data, and recorded witness statements. Meanwhile, attorneys for Guan and Hung filed motions requesting additional time to review terabytes of electronic data produced by prosecutors, calling it a massive trove of devices and documents. Even though trial has not yet begun, the court filings already reveal the strategy of each side. Prosecutors are focusing on clear electronic evidence, such as the 67 million USD money trail, directive emails, crypto wallet data, and accomplice testimony. The defense will most likely argue that Guan did not directly know the funds were illegal or that he believed they were legitimate donations, and that Hung merely followed instructions without fully understanding that he was violating United States law. They may even attempt to shift blame to other third parties. However, given the massive volume of evidence, that argument will be difficult to sustain. If convicted, Guan could face up to 20 years in prison for money laundering and 2 consecutive 30-year sentences for 2 counts of bank fraud, an aggregate maximum of 80 years. Lei Van Hung could face 20 years for money laundering, 30 years for bank fraud, and 15 years for conspiracy to commit identity theft. In addition, the defendants could face enhanced penalties depending on the identities of the victims whose information was stolen. The total maximum sentence could exceed 60 years. With penalties of that length, the 2 defendants would effectively be facing life behind bars. But the most dramatic developments are still ahead. Everything now awaits February 2nd, 2026, when the court is expected to deliver a clear judgment. For the United States, this case hit like an explosion. No one could believe that tens of millions of USD in taxpayer money had been stolen and only discovered much later, sparking intense public outrage. Even worse, that money was meant to support unemployed people, those already struggling at rock bottom. So the brazenness of Guan and Hung only poured fuel on the fire. More bitter still, the name exploited in this scheme was the Epoch Times, a major newspaper and media organization that had often spoken out in the name of justice. A place that once took pride in promoting morality and righteousness was now betrayed by its own financial leadership. In the early hours of January 3, 2026, Venezuela's capital, Caracas, was suddenly rocked by a series of loud explosions as flames lit up the night sky. At around 2 a.m., residents woke in panic to the roar of military aircraft flying low over buildings, accompanied by the thunder of missiles and bombs. The entire city plunged into darkness as widespread power outages hit, making everything even more chaotic. The fierce airstrikes continued until about 3:15 a.m., leaving black smoke and raging fires at multiple key locations across Caracas. When dawn broke, the city revealed a scene of turmoil. Some buildings and military vehicles were damaged, and windows in many homes had been shattered. Seeing this, residents hurried away from areas near the targets that had been hit. At the same time, rumors quickly spread about a mysterious raid on Venezuela's center of power. Witnesses said they saw groups of helicopters appearing in the night, and there were also sounds of gunfire near Fort Tiuna, the country's largest military complex, which houses residences and offices used by Venezuela's leadership. Afterward, Venezuelan security forces found signs of a forceful intrusion. An entrance gate blown open with explosives, multiple guards injured, and one extremely abnormal development. President Nicolás Maduro and his wife had vanished from their official residence. News that the president was missing amid the mysterious explosions triggered extreme fear and confusion. Who or what force could orchestrate such a bold attack in the heart of a heavily guarded capital? What was the real motive behind the abduction of this head of state? A political coup or an international anti-crime operation? Those sharp questions surfaced immediately as the Caracas government declared a state of emergency and accused outside actors of a serious act of military aggression. Just a few hours later, the answer began to emerge from the other side of the globe. On Truth Social at 5:21 a.m., Venezuela time, US, President Donald Trump suddenly posted an announcement stating that the United States had successfully carried out a large-scale military operation in Venezuela, and he claimed that President Nicolás Maduro and his wife had been arrested and removed from the country. This explosive statement was effectively a confirmation of the culprit behind the mysterious raid. The world was stunned. A sitting president seized by foreign forces in the middle of the night. Something without precedent in nearly 40 years had just happened, and the incident quickly became the focus of global attention. But how could US forces strike straight into Venezuela's center of power and abduct the sitting president in such a flash? Was this bold operation the result of years of surveillance, investigation, and meticulous preparation? These are the key questions that open the gripping inquiry into this extraordinary case. As soon as news broke that President Nicolás Maduro had been taken by USS, forces, Venezuelan officials, and the international community immediately launched wide-ranging investigations, dissecting the shocking event from every angle. In Caracas, security forces sealed off the scene around the Fort Tiuna residence complex and other struck locations to collect evidence. They found countless shell casings, fragments of missiles and bombs, and signs of blasting explosives at the base's gate. Testimony from surviving Venezuelan soldiers said that at around 2:05 a.m., a group of unfamiliar special forces in black, equipped with night vision goggles, suddenly appeared. They quickly overran the guard posts within minutes and then withdrew, taking 2 people who were bound and blindfolded. Those 2 individuals were later confirmed to be President Maduro and his wife. Meanwhile, in Washington, the veil of secrecy surrounding the operation codenamed Absolute Resolve was gradually lifted through official statements and press investigations. Early assessments from the US side argued that the arrest of Nicolás Maduro was not an impulsive act, but the result of a years-long investigation and preparation by US law enforcement agencies. US. Attorney General Pamela Bondi confirmed on January 3rd that the military operation was intended to execute a criminal prosecution decision by the US District Court for the Southern District of New York against Maduro, related to charges involving illicit drugs and terrorism. This information indicated that since 2020, US authorities had quietly gathered evidence and built an indictment against Maduro, treating him not as a head of state, but as a transnational criminal figure who needed to be brought before justice. Investigative documents and evidence released by the US painted an alarming picture of what it called the Maduro criminal enterprise. According to the New York indictment, Maduro and his senior associates were accused of running the Cartel of the Suns, a drug trafficking network allegedly protected by Venezuelan generals and high-ranking officials working in collusion with criminal organizations in Colombia and Mexico to move hundreds of tons of cocaine into the United States. From the late 2010s, multiple former Venezuelan officials who defected became key witnesses, providing testimony alleging that Maduro personally directed cocaine shipments and even allowed state military airports to be used as cover for flights carrying illicit drugs. For that reason, the US Drug Enforcement Administration had long classified Venezuela as a major drug transit hub. It quietly gathered financial trails, communications data, and narcotics samples traced back to shipments linked to officials in Caracas. By 2020, the accumulated evidence was said to be sufficient for a US federal grand jury to issue an indictment charging Maduro with multiple serious offenses, including narco-terrorism, conspiracy to import cocaine into the United States, possession of weapons of mass destruction, and conspiracy to use heavy weapons. The US Department of Justice at the time even offered a massive reward of up to 15 million USD for information leading to Maduro's arrest, a level of bounty rarely seen, typically reserved for international terrorist leaders such as Osama bin Laden. Although the US may have had a full legal basis to investigate and prosecute on paper, its greatest challenge remained the enforcement of an arrest warrant against a sitting president who held power and was heavily protected by the military. With Washington refusing to recognize the legitimacy of Maduro's government since the disputed 2018 election, the prospect of requesting Venezuela's cooperation for extradition was widely viewed as impossible because one reality was painfully obvious. The head of Venezuela was the very person the United States wanted to arrest. Therefore, from August 2025, when Donald Trump was re-elected for a second term, the Pentagon and the CIA began a bold plan to use military power to secretly kidnap President Nicolás Maduro out of Venezuela. This was seen as the starting point of a breathless, case-cracking operation, steeped in espionage and action. Special investigative methods were deployed to their maximum extent. Months earlier, the CIA had planted a deep cover agent within the Venezuelan government, someone who directly supplied detailed daily schedules of President Maduro's routines. In parallel, US intelligence reportedly rolled out a series of covert surveillance measures, building a replica of the secure room at Maduro's residence so special operations forces could rehearse the raid, while also using spy satellites and stealth MQ-9 Reaper drones to monitor the Venezuelan president's movements 24/7. According to disclosures by General Dan Kane, chairman of the US Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Special Operations Team studied every small detail of Maduro's life, from where he eats and sleeps, to daily habits, to personal preferences. The purpose of this meticulous preparation was to ensure that when the moment came, every variable would be absolutely precise, with no room for error. Intelligence leads suggested the opportunity for a direct capture was steadily ripening. From late 2025, under the pressure of economic sanctions and the risk of an internal coup, Maduro frequently retreated to rest at a residential compound inside the Fortuna military complex. This was a high-security area, but it sat near the outskirts of Caracas, close to a route leading toward the Caribbean Sea, an Achilles heel location that analysts said could allow US forces to approach by air. US analysts also noted multiple gaps in Venezuela's air defense system, especially after some radars and low-altitude missile systems reportedly suffered failures due to poor maintenance. Around the same time, the US Southern Caribbean Fleet repeatedly intercepted dozens of vessels and speedboats carrying illicit drugs departing from Venezuela and killed more than 100 individuals described as narcotics criminals at sea. These operations were not only intended to cut off the Maduro government's hidden financial streams, but also helped the US military familiarize itself with the terrain and apply psychological pressure ahead of a decisive strike. Through a combination of traditional and advanced methods, the net was gradually tightening around the prey. Still, the greatest challenge remained: how to penetrate the lair of a head of state guarded by a heavily protected military. To solve that problem, US officials reportedly had to discard many options and face numerous unexpected complications. Information indicated that in late December 2025, President Trump had approved a launch plan, but the operation was postponed at the last minute due to bad weather. The entire special operations team was forced to withdraw quietly after a false alarm in order to avoid exposure. That delay turned out to bring a tactical advantage. The Venezuelan side became more complacent, believing the United States would not risk an attack during the holiday period, while the Special Operations Forces gained more time to rehearse and refine the plan. As a result, when the real opportunity emerged in early January, everything was ready for a carefully calculated strike. From a criminal investigation perspective, the U.S. operation to capture Maduro can be imagined like a special manhunt for an extremely dangerous fugitive. Authorities patiently collect evidence, closely track the suspect's movements, wait for the perfect convergence of timing and conditions, and then suddenly move in to seize the target. Before dawn on January 3rd, all other potential obstacles from bodyguards to generals loyal to Maduro had already been neutralized or removed from suspicion. The only remaining target was now in the crosshairs. At that point, the plan entered its final phase, the arrest. What happened next was the climax of the case, a lightning raid unlike anything seen before, with details that will be gradually revealed in the sections ahead. The US named the plan Operation Absolute Resolve, a title meant to convey unwavering determination and tight coordination among multiple forces to achieve the final objective. On the night of January 2nd, 2026, after several days of unseasonal rain, weather conditions finally turned favorable. In a forward command center set up aboard the amphibious assault ship USS Iwo Jima off the coast of Venezuela, President Donald Trump gave the green light at 10:46 p.m. US Eastern Time, equivalent to 11:46 p.m. that same night in Venezuela. The operation was officially activated. Immediately afterward, more than 150 fighter jets and helicopters took off simultaneously from US military bases scattered across the Caribbean region. The air assets reportedly included F-22 and F-35 stealth fighters, F/A-18 strike aircraft, EA-18G electronic warfare aircraft, E-2D airborne early warning and command aircraft, B-1B Lancer strategic bombers, and numerous advanced reconnaissance drones. At sea, the USS Gerald R. Ford carrier strike group and multiple guided missile destroyers had already moved into position. The total U.S. force mobilized for this operation was estimated at around 15,000 personnel. However, all of it was digitally masked to reduce the chance of detection by Venezuelan radar. The deployment steps unfolded almost simultaneously, following a script rehearsed many times. The first step was to paralyze Venezuela's air defense system. In the very first minute of the operation, US Space Command and US Cyber Command were activated. Cyber units launched an attack targeting Caracas's power grid, plunging the entire capital into darkness. Almost at the same time, squadrons of fighters and electronic warfare aircraft struck positions hosting radar and surface-to-air missile systems around Caracas. Within minutes, Venezuela's air defense network was fully suppressed. Radar was heavily jammed, and missile sites were either precisely bombed or unable to fire in time. A safe air corridor was opened for US Special Operations helicopters to enter the capital without early detection. The next step was to use decoys to divert attention. At around 2 a.m. on January 3rd, 2026, as Caracas lay in total darkness and air defenses were already disabled, US bomber and fighter squadrons began striking multiple key military targets. A series of powerful explosions erupted from different directions. The La Carlota Air Base in eastern Caracas was shaken by bombs, and the Francisco de Miranda base nearby was hit by missiles. To the south, ammunition depots and barracks within the Fort Tiuna complex burst into intense flames. To the north, the port of La Guaira, the gateway linking Caracas to the Atlantic Ocean, had parts of its critical infrastructure destroyed. Additional explosions were also reported in the city of Maracay to the west, and the coastal town of Higuerote to the northeast, creating the impression that Caracas was under a full-scale assault. But the purpose of this rain of bombs was not to destroy, it was to distract. In the chaos, Almost no one noticed a formation of MH-60 Black Hawk helicopters skimming low over the Caribbean Sea from the north, slipping into the city at an altitude of only about 30 meters above the ground. The helicopter rotors blended into the thunder of bombs and gunfire, making it nearly impossible to distinguish. Under the cover of darkness and diversionary fire, a Delta Force assault team, together with the Night Stalkers of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, using 4 MH-60 helicopters and 2 modified CH-47 Chinooks, penetrated central Caracas with almost no resistance. The helicopters flew at rooftop level, using night vision equipment to locate the target, compound the residence where President Maduro was believed to be staying. At 2:01 a.m., Delta teams were inserted directly inside the compound, while the helicopters quickly looped back to provide aerial cover. Venezuelan forces only realized the intrusion when it was already far too late. The moment they hit the ground, US operators moved straight toward Maduro's living quarters. Venezuelan security spotted unfamiliar silhouettes and opened fire in alarm. But Delta Force immediately returned overwhelming fire, using suppressed weapons to drop guards, while supporting helicopters raked the watchtowers with minigun fire, forcing the defenders silent. The firefight lasted only a few dozen seconds. According to the US side, only 6 operators suffered minor injuries, and there were no US fatalities. After the operation, however, the Venezuelan government claimed that both soldiers and civilians were killed and wounded, and that some guards at Fort Tiuna were killed on the spot. After breaking the initial resistance, the assault team rushed straight to the building where the Maduro couple had been resting. They carried sledgehammers and shaped charges to breach doors. From entering the compound to reaching Maduro's bedroom took only about 3 minutes, so fast that most guards had no time to react. When the bedroom door was blown open, the operators discovered the target had already fled. Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, had awakened at the first explosions and ran toward a nearby safe room reinforced with thick steel. This was a room Maduro trusted, with a multi-layer steel door designed to withstand mortar rounds or ordinary explosives. However, thanks to intelligence gathered in advance, Delta Force anticipated this and even brought specialized cutting torches to slice through metal if needed. Moreover, the steel door had not fully closed. As Maduro and his wife reached the threshold of the safe room, the operators surged forward, slammed both of them to the ground, and restrained them on the spot. In an instant, the head of Venezuela's government was pinned to the floor, blindfolded with a black cloth, and handcuffed. Celia Flores was also bound and gagged to prevent her from calling for help. At that moment, both were still in sleepwear, barefoot, hair disheveled from being jolted awake. He tried to shout in resistance, but every sound was swallowed by explosions and the roar of helicopter engines. Immediately after the target was secured, a team of FBI agents and US Drug Enforcement Administration personnel moved in quickly. They read rights under US law, confirmed Maduro's identity using images and fingerprints, and seized several classified documents in the room. After that, the entire force withdrew at maximum speed. Maduro and his wife were escorted onto a waiting MH-60 helicopter. By 4:29 a.m., the helicopters had departed Venezuela's northern coastline, flew straight out over the Caribbean, and landed on the deck of the USS Iwo Jima. In other words, the entire operation lasted just 140 minutes from the moment President Trump activated it. The manhunt ended with one striking detail. In video released afterward, as Maduro was escorted to New York in shackles, he still appeared calm and reportedly said Happy New Year in Spanish to the personnel escorting him. However, in a photo taken on the helicopter leaving Caracas, he looked devastated, eyes covered, head bowed, hands cuffed, gripping a bottle of water as if to steady himself. But whatever the case, the outcome was sealed. A president who once held supreme power had become a prisoner, bringing the White House's lightning operation to a close with an image that shocked the world. And as expected, the world was thrown into turmoil because of Trump. Russia and China immediately condemned the US. Action, calling it a violation of sovereignty and international law and warning that it threatened regional peace. Countries across Latin America also responded sharply. Brazil's President Lula da Silva called the US strikes an unacceptable infringement. Mexico and Chile stressed that military force and external political manipulation were wrong and could not help resolve Venezuela's crisis. Even within the United States, People took to the streets to protest, demanding that Trump release President Nicolás Maduro. The United Nations called it a dangerous precedent, arguing that core principles of international security were being disregarded. Meanwhile, the European Union, America's close ally, appeared more cautious. The EU's High Representative for Foreign Policy, Kaja Kallas, said that under all circumstances, the principles of international law and the United Nations Charter must be respected. For that reason, she called for restraint from all sides. Even so, there were still those who supported the White House's unprecedented capture operation. They argued it was a powerful blow against a government widely viewed as authoritarian and corrupt, and one whose legitimacy had been questioned for years. Going further, some politicians even framed it as progress in the fight for freedom and democracy in South America. In particular, Argentina's President Javier Milei publicly backed the US airstrikes, praising them as a righteous action against dictatorship. Venezuela itself was split into three emotions. After this raid from the sky, thousands of President Maduro's supporters poured into the streets in Caracas and other areas to protest the US military attack and demand his release. They burned US flags, chanted slogans in support of national sovereignty, and expressed outrage at what they called an invasion. Meanwhile, others held celebrations over Maduro's arrest, calling it a chance for freedom and change after years of national crisis. Another segment felt even more uneasy. They did not support Maduro, yet they were still anxious because they had no idea what would happen next after the country's top leader was taken by another nation's military right in the middle of the capital. In reality, this was not the first time the United States had carried out high-stakes operations on foreign soil like this. In 1989, the US arrested General Manuel Noriega, Panama's leader at the time. Noriega was also prosecuted on drug-related charges. Speaking to the press, Washington said it acted to protect US citizens after Panamanian forces killed a US serviceman. In 2022, former Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez was extradited to the United States and sentenced to 45 years in prison, also on drug-related charges. However, Trump himself granted Hernandez a pardon this past December. And in the early 2026 manhunt, history seemed to repeat itself: the US government once again used drug trafficking as the justification to send forces into another country and seize its highest leader. That argument was also reinforced by another crucial factor: Maduro's past controversies. A large part of the world did not recognize the results of Venezuela's 2018 presidential election, viewing it as fraudulent, opaque, and lacking independent oversight. After taking power, Maduro also did little to change public perceptions. On the contrary, he was repeatedly described as a dictator, willing to crack down on dissent and repeatedly violate democratic norms. As a result, Venezuela's economy continued to collapse in recent years. Inflation soared, unemployment reached 44%, and even basic goods such as rice, soap, and medicine became severely scarce. All of this caused even many people inside the country to turn their backs on their own president. And the Trump administration quickly took advantage of that, telling the world that it was merely arresting a drug kingpin sitting in the wrong chair, not a legitimate leader of a sovereign nation. However, many observers warned that those who hate or despise the Maduro government should not celebrate too soon. In the history of international politics, the overthrow or capture of a leader rarely means the old order instantly collapses and a stable future naturally takes shape. That concern became even more pronounced when, just hours after the operation, US President Donald Trump declared that Washington would temporarily administer Venezuela in order to ensure security, stability, and the transition process. The wording immediately made the world boil. For many countries and analysts, this was no longer merely about arresting an individual facing criminal prosecution. It went straight to the issue of national sovereignty. A head of state was taken away, and an outside superpower openly spoke of administering that country, blurring the line between law enforcement and invasive intervention in a deeply troubling way. And beyond that, who knows what the United States intends to do with Venezuela's black gold? Its 303 billion barrels of oil, widely considered the largest reserves in the world, exceeding even Saudi Arabia and Iraq. In the eyes of many analysts, oil was the deepest driver behind this entire episode. Even former Vice President Kamala Harris bluntly accused the Trump administration of being driven more by oil interests than by efforts to fight drug trafficking or promote democracy. On a global scale, observers raised a more direct question than ever before. Was the pursuit of Maduro truly just a criminal operation centered on narcotics? Or the opening move in reshaping control over energy in one of the most resource-rich countries on Earth? And in Caracas, Trump's talk of administering the country cast a shadow over what remained of the government under the threat of external intrusion and control. For many military officers and security officials, the question was no longer who replaces Maduro, but whether Venezuela will still have full authority to decide its own destiny. This very ambiguity could trigger fierce defensive reactions from forces still loyal to the old regime. Internationally, Maduro's capture also set a chilling precedent. If a superpower can cite a criminal indictment to deploy special forces and seize a head of state inside another country's territory, then where does international law stand? Today it is Maduro. Tomorrow, whose name will be next? That question has made many governments, including those that do not like Caracas, grow wary. Even for Washington, today's celebration does not necessarily guarantee tomorrow's victory. Capturing one person does not mean dismantling an entire system. The allegations of narcotics, terrorism, and transnational crime will now have to be proven in court under the scrutiny of law and global public opinion. One legal misstep, one detail successfully challenged, and the entire operation once praised as absolute resolve could be recast as a reckless gamble that crossed the line. That is why many analysts say the moment Maduro was handcuffed was only the climax of one chapter, not the end of the story. What follows is a chain of political, legal, and security consequences far more complex. And history has taught time and again, the person who is arrested is not always the one who ultimately pays the highest price. Returning to the case, Nicolás Maduro is currently being prosecuted on charges of narco-terrorism, conspiracy to import cocaine into the United States, use and possession of heavy weapons, and conspiracy to use weapons of mass destruction. If convicted, he could face a life sentence, meaning imprisonment for the rest of his life. In Venezuela, the question of the country's fate after losing its top leader remains unanswered. Vice President Delcy Rodriguez is currently serving as the acting leader, but what about the long term? And how would the United States administer another country's government while America itself is deeply divided and politically turbulent? For that reason, many fear that civil war or a slide into lawlessness could become the near future for this beauty queen powerhouse. In June 2019, the Fitchburg Police Department received a report from a young woman. Over the phone, she described something almost unbelievable. A state senator had taken a gun and threatened her elderly aunt. As soon as the information was received, Fitchburg police officers and investigators arrived at the scene. It was the small home of a widowed woman. The first thing they saw was the front door left slightly ajar, with the lock showing signs of forced tampering. The homeowner was still shaken, her thin hands trembling as she gripped her granddaughter's shoulders. In panic, she kept repeating the name Tran, leaving the officers stunned because that was the name of a sitting state senator. As they moved deeper inside, the scene revealed even clearer clues. The family gun safe, located in a workroom at the back of the house, had been left wide open. Inside, the other firearms were still there, except for one unusually empty space. The woman pointed to it, sobbing, and said that her husband's Colt .45 was missing. According to the victim's statement, she was 70 years old and the widow of a veteran who had served in World War II. After her husband passed away, she had to manage the house and all of the couple's shared property on her own, including the gun collection her husband left behind. Because she knew little about firearms, she always felt anxious about keeping them in the house. However, instead of turning the guns over to the police herself, she thought of asking State Senator Tran for help, someone she had voted for as her representative and a familiar face at community events. He agreed to come to her home and introduced himself as someone who could help take care of the guns in a safe way. According to the victim, that day, Tran used his personal influence to persuade her to sign a contract transferring all of her late husband's firearms to him in exchange for $1,500 in cash. However, by that evening, She began to regret it when she realized the amount was far too little compared with the collection's true value. She called and asked Dinh to return the firearms, hoping to keep them as her last mementos of her husband. The senator agreed. True to his word, early the next morning, he brought 8 guns back to her home. She thought the matter had ended peacefully, but the widow did not expect that only a few hours after returning the guns, Tran would suddenly come back. According to her account, at around dawn, while she was home alone, Dinh abruptly stormed straight inside. He forced her to hand over the key to the gun safe, acting aggressively, completely different from the calm demeanor he had shown the day before. Terrified, she rushed to her bedroom, shut the door tightly, and hid inside, but she could still hear Tran rummaging around outside. When the house finally went quiet, she cautiously stepped out to check and discovered that the Colt .45, a keepsake tied to her late husband, had vanished from the safe. These initial details quickly helped investigators sketch out a brazen scenario. An elected official was suspected of exploiting trust to seize property from his own constituent. If the statement was accurate, this was not merely an ordinary legal violation, but a serious betrayal of public service ethics. Police then urgently collected evidence, including fingerprints around the safe and the entryway, as well as the contract bearing Tran's signature. That same morning, Fitchburg police also contacted the Massachusetts Attorney General's office to report everything. Immediately after receiving the case, the Massachusetts Attorney General's office formally opened an investigation. Because the named individual was a sitting state senator, the file was transferred to the Public Corruption and Integrity Unit. Seasoned investigators quickly began interviewing witnesses and gathering and reviewing relevant records. In terms of physical evidence, the gun sale contract was considered a key detail in the case. It contained Tran's signature, the victim's signature, and a list of 8 firearms being transferred. This document indicated that Tran had directly participated in the transaction involving those weapons. Even if he claimed it was a lawful agreement, the legality of the transaction was still questioned, because private firearm sales must comply with strict licensing procedures. At the same time, forensic officers collected fingerprints and footwear impressions from inside the house. Forensic results later showed that Tran's fingerprints matched the prints found on the gun safe and around the entryway, confirming his presence at the scene at the time the incident occurred. However, when police contacted the suspect, Tran, through his attorney, issued a statement insisting he was completely innocent and willing to cooperate with investigators. Even so, investigators noted that during the first interview, Dinh was evasive and repeatedly contradicted himself. At first, he denied any gun-related transaction and claimed the elderly woman had fabricated the story. When shown the contract bearing his own signature, Dinh shifted to admitting he had purchased the firearms, but insisted it was merely an act of helping the victim and that there had been no coercion. As for what happened the next morning, Dinh continued to deny it, claiming there had been no break-in and no gun taken as alleged. He even implied the victim was not mentally sound, and that this was why she made such accusations. During follow-up investigation, police executed a court-authorized search of Tran's home and office. The goal was to find the missing Colt .45, but no physical evidence was recovered. Later, investigators determined that once Dinh realized he was under intense scrutiny, he quietly returned the gun to the victim through an intermediary a few weeks after the incident. This ensured the Colt was recovered safely, but it also suggested he had attempted to conceal his actions. The investigative team also found inaccuracies in the gun license renewal paperwork that Tran submitted in May 2019. Specifically, he failed to disclose that he had just purchased additional firearms under the contract with the victim, an omission considered a false statement on an official document and a violation of firearm regulations. It did not stop there. Evidence also showed that after the incident became public, Dinh had sent a letter to the victim demanding that she write an apology letter. In that letter, he subtly pressured her, suggesting that she was the reason his reputation had been damaged and that she should be held responsible for it. Piece by piece, these details formed a clearer picture. Tran had exploited the trust of an innocent citizen for personal gain, and when his reputation was threatened, he tried to cover up his conduct while shifting blame onto the victim. The investigation then lasted for more than 2 years, largely because Dinh was still a sitting official, requiring the legal process to proceed with extreme caution. In November 2020, Tran ran for re-election to the state Senate but lost, surrendering the seat to a Democratic opponent. After leaving the state Senate, he pivoted to a run for the U.S. House of Representatives in the 2022 election. But right in the middle of that congressional campaign, on July 1st, 2022, a Worcester County grand jury formally indicted Dean Tran on a series of criminal charges related to the incident involving the elderly woman's gun. The grand jury indictment listed a total of 6 charges, including taking a firearm, i.e., larceny of property valued over $250 from a person over 60 years old, making false statements on a gun license renewal application, fraudulently obtaining a signature, providing false information to police during the investigation, and obtaining property by confinement or threats. These charges underscored the seriousness of the case, especially the count related to obtaining property by inducing fear, indicating that prosecutors viewed the act of coercing the elderly woman inside her home as violent in nature, closer to robbery than ordinary theft. When the indictment was made public, Dean Tran immediately denied all allegations. He appeared at Worcester Superior Court on July 28, 2022 for arraignment and entered a not guilty plea to every charge. Earlier, Dean posted on his personal Facebook page that the allegations were completely false and claimed the timing of the indictment was politically motivated. He argued that Attorney General Maura Healey, a Democrat, had deliberately tried to disadvantage him by undermining his congressional campaign, thereby helping his opponent, Lori Trahan. Not stopping there, Dean quickly filed a federal lawsuit against Healey, accusing her of abusing prosecutorial power for political purposes. In response to these claims, Healey's office declined to comment, citing the principle of not discussing cases pending trial. Despite Dean's denials and legal complaints, prosecutors and the court remained determined to bring the matter to light. However, due to the complexity of the case file, the criminal trial over the gun incident was not scheduled to be heard until 2025. While awaiting his court date, Dean Tran continued running for Congress and lost in November 2022 before facing another legal storm, this time at the federal level, over alleged fraud involving pandemic relief benefits. Specifically, Federal Department of Labor inspectors reviewed the records and found a period in which Dean Tran received unemployment benefits while still having significant income at the same time. Tracing the information on the benefit application, they identified leads connected to Dean's sister's company, Tuet T. Martin, and also uncovered emails between the two discussing a job offer letter with multiple suspicious details. Investigators, therefore, determined that when the COVID-19 pandemic erupted in early 2020, Dean Tran, despite being entangled in an ethics scandal at the state Senate, still did not miss an opportunity to profit financially from the government's relief programs. In January 2021, Dean Tran officially left the state Senate after losing the election. Once he was no longer receiving a salary, he began looking for ways to take advantage of emergency relief packages. Dean knew that at the time, the government was implementing pandemic unemployment assistance for people who had lost income due to COVID. Even though he had just completed his term and did not meet the usual definition of unemployment, he still sought a way to claim a portion of those funds. To pull this off, Dean constructed a fairly sophisticated scheme. He asked his sister, Tuet T. Martin, the owner of a food company in New Hampshire, to create a fake job offer letter. The letter stated that Martin's company had offered to hire Dean Tran, but for objective reasons, he was unable to accept the position. The purpose of this letter was to prove that Dean had lost a job opportunity due to the impact of the pandemic. He edited the document and backdated it, and even forged his sister's signature to make the file look legitimate. With this carefully prepared set of false paperwork, Dean Tran submitted an application for benefits, claiming he had lost income and could not take a new job because he had to care for a young child during the pandemic. In reality, shortly after leaving the state Senate, Dean found paid consulting work for an auto parts business in New Hampshire. Throughout that period, he collected consulting pay while also receiving weekly COVID-related unemployment benefits. By the end of 2021, Dean Tran had received a total of $30,120 in federal unemployment benefits. Not only that, when filing his 2021 tax return, he also concealed $54,700 in income earned from the auto parts company. When she realized authorities were starting to pay attention to the case, Martin panicked and deleted certain emails related to arranging the job offer letter. However, digital forensics specialists later recovered the deleted data. In November 2023, the FBI arrested Dean Tran under a federal indictment containing 28 charges related to COVID benefits, fraud, and tax evasion. Around the same time, the FBI also arrested Tuan T. Martin in New Hampshire, charging her with 2 counts of obstruction of justice and 1 count of making false statements for providing false information to federal investigators and destroying evidence, namely the related emails. Once again, the public was left stunned. It turned out that beyond the gun incident, Dean Tran was also accused of quietly siphoning off relief funds during a period when many people were struggling desperately because of the pandemic. What stands out is that before becoming entangled in this string of scandals, Dean Tran had lived a relatively impressive life, with countless achievements in his career. Dean Tran was born in 1975 in Vietnam, moved to the United States with his family as a child, and grew up in Massachusetts. He graduated from Brandeis University in 1997, then built his life and career in the city of Fitchburg. Dean began his political path at the local level, serving as a Fitchburg city councilor before winning election to the Massachusetts State Senate in 2017 in a special election. He represented the Worcester and Middlesex district and served as an assistant minority leader in the Senate from 2018 to 2020. As the first Vietnamese-American to enter the state legislature, Dean Tran was once expected to bring a diverse and fresh voice to Massachusetts politics. In his personal life, Dean Tran was married and had 4 children, and he was also often known as someone who emphasized traditional family values. In the eyes of supporters, he was once seen as a model example of a successful immigrant. However, behind that somewhat glossy image, many colleagues described Dean Tran's personality as containing plenty of contradictions. He was regarded as intelligent and politically sharp, but also competitive and rather impulsive. A report released in 2020 by the Senate Ethics Committee noted that Dean's office operated in a disorderly manner without clearly separating public duties from personal matters. Many staff members said they often felt uncertain, unsure whether they were carrying out official public work or doing personal tasks for their boss. In fact, in March 2020, the Massachusetts Senate Ethics Committee concluded that Dean Tran had violated the rules by using his office staff to participate in campaign activities during work hours. This led to him being stripped of a low-level leadership position, and he was also barred from direct contact with staff, with all communication restricted to official work email only. Notably, Dean later asked the state's highest court to overturn the matter, arguing that he had legislative immunity for actions alleged to have occurred while he was serving as a senator. However, in September 2025, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court rejected that argument and affirmed that he still had to face the criminal legal process. That detail suggested Dean Tran had a tendency to downplay the law, believing his political status could shield him from legal responsibility. After witnessing scandal after scandal, many of Dean Tran's former supporters were left deeply bitter and disappointed. They once saw him as a devoted father and a dedicated public servant. But over time, layer after layer of the facade was peeled away, revealing Dean Tran, in the end, as a fallen politician willing to break the law for personal gain and then trying to deny responsibility while blaming others, and even the system itself. Dean Tran's case unfolded across multiple legal fronts, but the public's attention remained focused on the federal trial in late 2024 over benefits, fraud, along with the state court proceedings scheduled for 2025. At the federal trial in September 2024, Dean's defense attorney tried to portray him as a victim of political maneuvering, emphasizing that he had once been an opponent of multiple Democratic officials. On that basis, they argued the case was politically motivated and that the amount of money allegedly involved was insignificant compared with many other cases. They also insisted that Dean did not realize he was breaking the law because he believed he was eligible to receive the benefits. However, these arguments did not persuade the court. After 6 days of proceedings, the jury reached a unanimous verdict, finding Dean Tran guilty on all 23 counts, including 20 fraud counts and 3 counts of filing false tax returns. The outcome left Dean deeply dissatisfied. Soon afterward, in December 2024, he posted on his personal Facebook page calling on President Donald Trump to consider granting him a pardon. However, the appeal received no response and quickly faded, partly because Dean Tran's case did not carry a clearly political character, and partly because a president would have little ability to intervene in sentences under state jurisdiction. In February 2025, a federal court in Boston sentenced Dinh Tran to 18 months in prison and 2 years of supervised release. He was ordered to repay $25,100 to the Massachusetts Department of Unemployment Assistance and $23,327 to the Internal Revenue Service, and to pay an additional $7,500 fine. At sentencing, Dinh remained defiant, declaring he would appeal to the end and insisting there had been no fraud or misappropriation. In court, he continued to attack the investigation, claiming that the law was being turned into a political tool, and insisting he was targeted solely because of political disagreements. Even so, the judge emphasized that an 18-month prison term was necessary as a deterrent, because no one is above the law, not even those who once held public office. Regarding the gun theft case, on June 2, 2025, Dinh Tran agreed to plead guilty under a deal with prosecutors. He admitted to 3 charges: taking a firearm, witness intimidation, and making false statements on a firearms license application. In exchange, the more serious charges were withdrawn. The judge sentenced Dinh Tran to 6 months in jail for each charge, but the sentences were to run concurrently and be served at the same time as the federal sentence he was already serving. In practice, this meant Dinh would not have to serve additional jail time after completing the 18-month federal term, but his record would reflect an additional state-level criminal conviction. Even so, Dinh Tran's legal troubles were not entirely over. As mentioned earlier, he still faced another case related to conflict of interest violations after being accused of using state employees for campaign activities. The criminal trial in Suffolk County is expected to be held in 2026. This means that even after serving his federal prison sentence and pleading guilty at the state level, Dinh Tran still has to enter one final legal battle. And in the view of legal experts, if he is convicted in this case, he could continue to face additional penalties. As for his sister, Tuan Martin, she is also firmly denied the obstruction of justice and false statement charges, so her case was separated for a separate trial. By the end of 2025, Dinh Tran had expressed an intention to plead guilty in the matter involving his sister in exchange for leniency, while Martin chose to go to trial to defend her name. Her trial is expected to take place in January 2026 and is believed to reveal further details about how the siblings attempted to cover their tracks. Dinh Tran's case became a resounding wake-up call for the public in Massachusetts. On one hand, it enraged the public and gradually eroded trust in politicians. As someone who once swore to serve the people could profit from the very vulnerable, from taking property from a lonely elderly woman to siphoning off relief funds during the pandemic that were meant for workers who had lost their jobs. Dinh Tran's downfall also left many of his former supporters deeply bitter. In particular, the Vietnamese community in Massachusetts, which had once placed so much hope and pride in him, felt an even sharper sense of disappointment. Across the press and social media, countless voices condemned him harshly, calling Dinh Tran bottomlessly greedy, a disgrace to the Vietnamese community, and a betrayer of his oath of office. In the end, the case closed on the image of Dinh Tran leaving the courthouse in an orange prison uniform, hands cuffed, eyes vacant. That image stood in stark contrast to the day he took his oath of office, back when he wore a neat suit and solemnly pledged to serve the people. And you? What do you think of the sentence the court imposed? Do you believe it is strong enough to deter the abuse of power or not? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've stayed with us to this point, don't forget to hit like, share the video, and subscribe to Vietnamese Case Files to continue on this journey with us, because there are still many other notable cases waiting to be uncovered. That's where we'll end today's video. Thank you for watching, and see you again in the next case episode.